The sea is calm when the decision is made. Not dramatic, just orderly. Trunks are sealed, gloves adjusted, names checked against lists written in perfect ink. Gaslight glows along the pier, and steam drifts upward like a promise kept. For the women boarding these ships, danger does not announce itself. It arrives disguised as confidence, as progress, as the quiet assurance that the modern world has solved risk itself. These are not reckless travelers. They are heiresses, women raised inside drawing rooms where every movement is rehearsed, every breath measured. Yet here, at the edge of the water, they step willingly into a new faith, steel over sail, engines over instinct. The same age that trusts tonics to calm the nerves now trusts ships to conquer nature. And so wealth walks aboard, believing itself untouchable. Before we continue, take a moment to settle in. Lower the lights if you can. If you're listening late, tell me where you are in the world. And if you're drawn to histories like this, quiet, unsettling, and rarely told, subscribe and stay with me. Because this is the moment before the reckoning, before disaster had a name, when privilege leaned too far over the railing, and the sea waited patiently below. Tonight, we return to the years before the Titanic, when rich heiresses risked everything at sea, convinced the future could not betray them. The harbor does not roar. It murmurs. Coal smoke drifts low across the water, blurring the line between sky and sea until both seem equally uncertain. Gas lamps flicker along the pier, their light softened by mist, turning polished brass and black iron into something almost gentle. Steam exhales from valves and funnels in slow, rhythmic breaths, as though the ship itself is alive, calm, regulated, obedient. On the dock, trunks stand in patient rows. Their surfaces are scarred only slightly, leather darkened by travel but still proud, brass corners gleaming with the assurance of expense. Porters move quietly, trained not to hurry the wealthy, lifting fortunes that will not be spoken of aloud. Names are checked, papers folded, every action is precise, rehearsed, reassuring. Disorder is kept at bay through ritual. The women arrive last. They step from carriages wrapped in wool and fur, gloved hands resting briefly on polished doors before letting go. Their dresses are practical only in the way fashion allows: heavy skirts, narrow waists, layers meant for parlors rather than salt air. They pause, just long enough to look, not at the sea, but at the ship, its height, its lights, its promise of smooth passage and unbroken schedules. They have been told this crossing is nothing like the old voyages. No pitching decks, no endless uncertainty, no primitive reliance on wind or luck. This is modern travel, measured, engineered, safe. The pier reinforces the message. There is no chaos here, no shouting sailors or desperate farewells. Everything smells of order: oil, metal, damp wool, faint perfume. The ship waits without impatience, lines taut, gangway steady beneath polished shoes. It does not threaten, it invites. For many of these women, this is not adventure, it is expectation. Travel has become a duty of refinement. To cross the Atlantic is to demonstrate confidence in the age itself. To hesitate would be provincial. To refuse would invite questions no woman of standing wishes to answer. A mother smooths her daughter's sleeve, correcting a crease no one else would notice. A chaperone murmurs final instructions already memorized. A husband presses a kiss to a gloved hand, his expression firm with belief rather than fear. The ship, after all, has been approved by engineers, by doctors, by men who speak with certainty. What danger could remain? The sea barely moves. It laps against the pilings with polite restraint, dark and unreadable beneath the lights. Its vastness has been softened by timetables and tonnage figures, reduced to something that can be crossed between meals. No one speaks of storms. No one speaks of ice. Those belong to another era, another kind of ship. As the women ascend the gangway, they do so upright, composed, watched but never questioned. Their footsteps echo briefly against steel, then vanish into carpeted corridors designed to erase the idea of peril. Inside, there will be electric light, warm cabins, the murmur of conversation. Inside, the sea will become an abstraction. Behind them, the pier exhales once more. Steam thickens. Lines are cast off. The distance between shore and hull widens by inches, then feet, then something harder to measure. No alarms sound. No unease is acknowledged. Only the quiet confidence of an age that believes it has finally learned how to keep its daughters safe by teaching them not to doubt at all. Wealth, when it settles early, does not feel like freedom. It feels like instruction. From childhood, these women are taught that money carries direction, that it must circulate, appear, affirm. An inheritance is not merely received, it is demonstrated. It must be seen in the right houses, the right wardrobes, the right journeys. Stillness is permitted only to those who lack options. To remain at home too long is to invite speculation, and speculation is far more dangerous than the sea. Their fortunes have been discussed around them since girlhood, always in careful tones. Trustees, investments, properties across borders, Europe spoken of as refinement, America as opportunity. Distance becomes proof of cultivation. A young woman who has not crossed an ocean is considered unfinished, her polish incomplete, her confidence untested. Travel, therefore, is not indulgence, it is curriculum. The heiress learns this before she learns herself. Her calendar fills without her consent. Seasons dictate movement, summers abroad, winters returned, springs spent in transit. Tickets are purchased by fathers, uncles, guardians, men who frame the journey as sensible, even necessary. The ship is presented as the most efficient solution to a social expectation already agreed upon. No one asks whether she wishes to go, only whether she prefers a private cabin or a suite. Money cushions every doubt. It buys assurances in advance. Letters from shipping lines arrive thick with praise for engineering and comfort, describing vessels as though they were drawing rooms afloat. The language is soothing, paternal, exact. The implication is clear. Risk has been handled elsewhere. There is nothing left for her to manage. And so declining becomes unthinkable. To hesitate would appear ungrateful. To refuse would suggest fragility. The women most admired are those who board with composure, who treat the crossing as routine. Courage, in this world, is quiet compliance. The bravest thing is to proceed as if there were nothing to fear. Inheritance compounds the pressure. A fortune demands presence meetings with solicitors abroad, inspections of properties inherited from distant relatives, introductions arranged to secure alliances that span continents. Even grief can require travel. Estates must be settled, affairs concluded. A woman of means is expected to move where her money already lives. The ship becomes a corridor between obligations. Within families, this movement is spoken of proudly. Daughters dispatched across the Atlantic are described as capable, modern, strong. Their departures are framed as evidence of progress itself. A mother who worries is gently reminded of advancements. A father who hesitates is reassured by statistics. Confidence is collective, reinforced until it feels impolite to doubt. There is also spectacle. Heiresses are watched when they travel. Their presence aboard a ship lends it prestige. Their names appear in society columns, their itineraries traced like endorsements. The vessel becomes respectable by association. If women of such standing trust it, who would dare question its safety? The pressure tightens invisibly. Once aboard, the choice retroactively disappears. Any fear that surfaces must be smoothed away, hidden behind manners learned early. To acknowledge danger would be to admit a failure of judgment, not only personal, but familial. The weight of legacy presses heavier than the sea ever could. So they go. They board because staying would mean explaining, because their wealth has already decided for them, because movement is the language their world understands, and silence is reserved for those without inheritance to justify. The ship pulls away, carrying not recklessness, but obligation fortunes that cannot remain still, and women taught that to fulfill them is the safest course of all. The old sea had moods. It groaned through rigging, snapped canvas without warning, and announced its displeasure in advance. Sailors once read it the way farmers read clouds, by instinct, by memory, by fear earned honestly. But that sea is no longer consulted. It has been overruled. Steel now stands between water and passenger. The ship no longer bends to the wind, it cuts through it. Its hull does not creak or complain. It holds its shape with mathematical stubbornness, plates riveted into certainty. Where sail once yielded, engines now insist. Movement is no longer negotiated, it is enforced. The ocean becomes something to be managed, not respected. This transformation is celebrated loudly and often. Newspapers praise tonnage and horsepower with reverence once reserved for monarchs. Diagrams appear in popular magazines, showing cross-sections of hulls and compartments, explaining carefully, reassuringly, how modern ships are built not merely to float, but to endure. Words like redundant, reinforced, fail-safe enter polite conversation. They sound technical enough to be unquestionable. For the women boarding, this language works quietly on the nerves. Steel feels different beneath the feet, solid, unresponsive. Unlike wood, it offers no tremor, no warning vibration. The deck remains level even when the water darkens. The ship does not sway like a living thing, it proceeds like a decision already made. This steadiness is mistaken for strength. Inside, the illusion deepens. Cabins are insulated from the sea itself. Walls are thick, windows small. The sound of water is replaced by the distant pulse of engines, steady and soporific. It is a mechanical heartbeat, one that suggests vigilance even in sleep. Passengers are encouraged subtly to forget what surrounds them, to think of the ship not as a vessel on the sea, but as a structure moving through space. Sail once required attention. Steel demands trust. The crew speaks of the ship as though it were incorruptible. They reference calculations, stress tolerances, innovations perfected only recently yet spoken of as eternal. The language is authoritative, almost medical. If doubt arises, it is treated as a misunderstanding rather than a warning. Numbers replace instincts. Charts replace stories. For women raised to respect authority, this is decisive. They have been taught that modernity improves everything it touches. Medicine, lighting, sanitation. Why should travel be any different? If engineers say the ship is safer than any before it, then fear becomes irrational, a relic of the past, something unsuited to a lady of the new century. And so sail is quietly recast as primitive. Old disasters are blamed on wood, wind, ignorance. The sea itself is absolved. It was not nature that killed it, was outdated design. Steel promises correction, mastery, control at last. To question this promise would be to question progress itself. Yet steel also conceals. It hides fractures until they are complete. It fails suddenly, without the gradual pleading of timber. Where wood splinters, steel tears. Where sail flaps and warns, engines continue until stopped by force beyond calculation. These truths are known, but not discussed. They belong to shipyards and engineers, not to salons or dining rooms. On deck, the women feel only reassurance. The rail is cold beneath their gloves. The ship moves forward without hesitation. There is no visible struggle, no argument with the water. The ocean appears obedient, flattened by momentum and mass. It gives the impression of submission. This is the great exchange of the age: uncertainty for confidence, caution for efficiency. instinct for assurance. Sail, with all its honesty, is dismissed. Steel is trusted without question. And as the ship advances, it carries with it a belief far heavier than cargo that the sea has finally been solved, and that nothing strong enough could ever be asked to bend. Calm, once, was a matter of luck, a fortunate crossing, a merciful sky, a sea that chose not to argue. But in this age, calm has been renamed. It is no longer chance, it is calculation. The absence of motion is presented as proof. Passengers remark upon it in low, satisfied tones. How smooth the water seems, how steady the deck remains beneath their feet. Teacups sit untroubled on tables. Candles burn without a flicker. Nothing slides, nothing tips. The ship advances with such composure that the sea itself appears disciplined, reduced to a surface rather than a force. This stillness is not interpreted as a condition. It is interpreted as a result. Pamphlets distributed before departure explain it patiently. Stability, they say, is engineered. Motion has been corrected. Ballast has been perfected. The ship has been designed to neutralize discomfort, to eliminate surprise. What was once unpredictable has been rendered measurable, and what can be measured, the age insists, can be trusted. The women aboard absorb this lesson without effort. Many of them have already lived within similar assurances. Medicines prescribed to quiet nerves, electrical lighting to banish shadows, gas systems to regulate warmth. Their lives have been steadily insulated from fluctuation. Calm has been manufactured for them in drawing rooms and clinics alike. It feels familiar, it feels right. So when the sea behaves, it confirms everything they have been told. No one remembers that calm can precede collapse. The ship's smooth passage is discussed as evidence of progress rather than a temporary alignment of conditions. Sailors once spoke of deceptive waters, surfaces too quiet, skies too obliging. That language has fallen out of use. It sounds unsophisticated now, even superstitious. Modern travelers prefer explanations with diagrams. The calm is framed as permanent. Officers reassure with practiced ease. They mention averages, historical records, typical routes. They speak of the ocean as though it were a ledger, balanced, predictable, accounted for. Risk, when mentioned at all, is treated as an artifact of earlier eras, something already solved. For women trained to defer to expertise, this is decisive. They have been taught that knowledge resides elsewhere in institutions, in men with credentials, in systems too complex to question. To doubt calm would be to question competence. To question competence would be impolite. So the stillness becomes comforting, almost soporific. The ship does not lurch. The horizon does not tilt. The night air does not bite. Instead, there is rhythm. Meals arrive on time. Music drifts down corridors. The engines maintain their steady pulse, never racing, never hesitating. This consistency feels intentional, even protective. The vessel seems alert while its passengers are allowed to relax. Calm becomes a signal that vigilance is unnecessary. Yet calm is not evidence of safety, it is only the absence of disturbance. This distinction is never articulated. It does not need to be. The age prefers conclusions that flatter its confidence. The women stand at the rail, wrapped against the chill, watching the water slide past in dark sheets. They do not imagine what lies beneath. Depth is an abstraction. The sea's silence is mistaken for compliance. Its vastness is reduced to a surface observation. In this atmosphere, fear has nowhere to attach itself. There is no sensory trigger to justify unease. No creak, no groan, no sway. Anxiety without stimulus feels unreasonable, almost indulgent, and so it is dismissed. The calm does its work quietly, persuading without argument. This is how belief settles in, not through drama, but through comfort, through the gentle suggestion that if something were wrong, one would surely feel it by now. The sea offers no contradiction. The ship continues forward, and in the stillness, confidence deepens, chemical, refined, and dangerously serene. Fear, when it appears in respectable households, is expected to know its place. It may surface briefly expressed as a question, a pause, a hand resting too long on a daughter's sleeve, but it is never allowed to linger. Mothers especially are taught this discipline early. Their role is not to doubt the world their children must enter, but to prepare them to move through it smoothly. Anxiety is to be managed, not indulged. And so they board without fear, or at least without visible fear. On the pier, these women stand upright, composed, their faces arranged into expressions of confidence learned through repetition. They have rehearsed this moment inwardly. They have reminded themselves of facts. The ship is modern, the route established, the company reputable. Others have gone before and returned. Nothing, statistically speaking, demands alarm. A mother's worry must justify itself to be allowed voice. This one cannot. She has crossed herself against illness, against scandal, against poverty. She has survived childbirth, winters, long silences. The sea, in comparison, has been rendered orderly, reduced to schedules and timetables. To protest now would feel irrational, almost selfish. There is also precedent. Mothers before them boarded trains when rails were new. They trusted doctors when medicine changed. They accepted electric light when darkness had once been absolute. Each generation has been asked to exchange instinct for assurance. Each time, they were told this was progress. To resist would be to admit fragility, not just personal, but generational. And so they set an example. A daughter watches her mother step onto the gangway without hesitation, chin lifted, posture steady. Whatever unease the younger woman carries is recalibrated instantly. If her mother believes this is safe, then it must be. Maternal confidence becomes proof more persuasive than any pamphlet. This confidence is not reckless, it is cultivated. Mothers have been reassured in advance, letters exchanged, conversations held with husbands, brothers, physicians. The language used is calming, paternal, technical. They are told the ship is inspected, the crew experienced, the route routine. Words like unlikely and exceptional appear frequently. Disaster is framed as an anomaly rather than a possibility. Over time, reassurance hardens into belief. There is also the weight of responsibility. A mother who hesitates risks transmitting fear. Fear, once introduced, is difficult to contain. It spreads into posture, speech, decision-making. A fearful daughter is considered delicate, unreliable. No mother wants that for her child. So doubt is swallowed. Hands that tremble briefly are stilled. Questions are silenced before they fully form. A kiss is placed on a cheek with deliberate steadiness. The message is clear. This is acceptable, expected, normal. Even grief is managed this way. Some mothers board carrying quiet losses, husbands buried, children grown distant, fortunes changed hands. The sea becomes a means of transition, a corridor between chapters. In these moments, movement itself feels necessary. Staying still would allow reflection. Travel offers distraction, structure, and the illusion of forward motion. The ship, then, is not merely transportation. It is reassurance incarnate. It promises continuity, routine, the maintenance of order, even while crossing vast, indifferent water. Mothers trust this promise because they have been trained to trust systems that claim to know better than instinct. They do not imagine catastrophe because catastrophe has been made impolite to imagine. It belongs to another class of people, those without preparation, without education, without proper vessels. So they board calmly, publicly unafraid. Their confidence settles over their daughters like a garment, heavy and protective. It teaches them that safety is not something one senses, it is something one is told. And as the ship pulls away, carrying generations forward together. Fear is left behind on the pier not because it is unfounded, but because it has been rendered unnecessary by belief itself. Reassurance, in this age, wears a uniform. It arrives neatly pressed, carrying instruments, diagrams, and credentials that speak before the man himself does. It does not speculate, it explains. It does not admit uncertainty, it reframes it. And once delivered, it expects to be trusted. Doctors are the first to speak. They address nervousness as a condition, not a warning. A woman's unease is described in clinical terms: fatigue, overstimulation, sensitivity symptoms of modern life rather than responses to danger. Tonic bottles are prescribed, drops measured carefully, advice offered with paternal calm. Rest will resolve it, fresh air will help, movement is encouraged, travel, even, is recommended. The implication is subtle but firm. The body is the problem, not the situation. If fear arises, it is something to be managed internally. Chemical solutions replace instinctive ones. Ether, laudanum, bromides, names spoken softly, administered discreetly. They smooth the edges of thought, dampen the imagination, quiet the nervous system until anxiety loses its vocabulary. By the time a woman boards the ship, her unease has often already been addressed medically, authoritatively, conclusively. Then come the engineers. They speak a different language, but the effect is the same. Their confidence is rooted in measurement rather than medicine, yet it carries equal authority. They reference thicknesses, pressures, tolerances. They describe the ship as a series of solutions, each problem anticipated and resolved before it could become visible. Their explanations are technical but selective. They do not dwell on limits. They speak instead of improvements. Each vessel, they say, is safer than the last. Each crossing builds upon experience. Failure belongs to the past, a necessary stage on the path toward mastery. What remains is refinement. For women accustomed to deferring to male expertise, this certainty is persuasive. The doctor assures her body will endure. The engineer assures her environment will cooperate. Between them, fear has no territory left to occupy. If something were wrong, surely these men, educated, measured, authoritative, would say so. But reassurance is not the same as truth. It is designed to soothe, not to prepare. Doctors do not teach women what terror feels like when it is justified. Engineers do not describe the rare circumstances that exceed design. Both professions operate under an unspoken agreement. Uncertainty must be contained. Doubt is corrosive. Confidence is therapeutic. So language is carefully chosen. Risk becomes negligible. Possibility becomes unlikely. The ocean is referred to as well understood. These phrases are not lies, exactly, but they are incomplete. They omit scale. They omit consequence. They omit the reality that nature does not consult credentials. Still, reassurance spreads efficiently. It passes from professional to parent, from parent to daughter, from daughter to friend. It settles into conversation as fact rather than opinion. Over time, it becomes impolite to question. A woman who expresses fear in the face of so much expert confidence risks appearing ungrateful or worse, hysterical. And hysteria, in this era, is a diagnosis no woman wishes to invite. So the words of doctors and engineers are internalized. They become a kind of armor, repeated silently when the ship creaks or the night feels too quiet. The belief is simple. Intelligent men have accounted for this. Therefore, it is safe. The ship glides forward, carrying with it not just bodies, but trust placed carefully in hands that speak calmly and never pause long enough to admit what they cannot guarantee. Reassurance does its work invisibly, dulling the edge of awareness until danger no longer feels imaginable. And by the time imagination might be needed, It has already been professionally dismissed. Once, the sea demanded reverence. It was written about in verse, approached with ritual, feared openly and without apology. It swallowed ships whole and returned nothing but splintered wood and rumor. Sailors spoke of it with humility, acknowledging moods, seasons, and omens. To cross it was to bargain with something older and stronger than any man. That sea has been retired. In its place stands a new idea, one quieter, flatter, and far more dangerous. The ocean is no longer imagined as a living force but as a route, a distance to be covered efficiently, a space rendered ordinary by repetition and technology. Romance, with all its caution and awe, has been dismissed as unnecessary ornament. The modern sea is not poetic, it is logistical. Shipping lines describe it in miles and hours, not tempests or depths. Travel brochures speak of smooth passages and predictable arrivals. Storms are statistical outliers, mentioned only to be dismissed. The language once used by mariners has been replaced by the language of schedules. For women raised on novels and paintings, this shift is subtle but complete. The sea they imagine is not the sea beneath the hull. It is a softened version, muted, distant, framed by railings and promenades. It exists primarily as scenery, something to be admired briefly, then ignored. A backdrop to conversation, not an actor in the story. The ship encourages this detachment. Wide decks invite strolling rather than vigilance. Chairs face inward toward one another, rather than outward toward the water. Music plays softly in the evenings, masking the sound of waves against steel. The design itself suggests that nothing outside requires attention. Even language conspires. The crossing is described as pleasant, the ocean as well-behaved. These words would have sounded absurd a generation earlier. Now they pass unchallenged. Familiarity has been mistaken for understanding, repetition for mastery. Romance once warned of danger. Its absence reassures. Instead, women are no longer taught to respect the sea, they are taught to ignore it. Their education includes geography but not humility. They know where the ocean is, not what it does. Its scale has been reduced to maps, its violence to footnotes. This new framing has consequences. Without romance, there is no reverence. Without reverence, there is no caution. The sea becomes something to lean against, not something to watch. It is assumed to remain in its place, to behave according to expectation. The idea that it might assert itself feels almost rude. And so attention turns inward. Cabins are discussed, meals anticipated, dresses planned for dinner. The ship becomes the world, complete and self-contained. The water outside might as well be decorative glass. The women on board do not feel foolish for this detachment it has been encouraged. They have been told that progress has removed the need for superstition, for vigilance, for old fears dressed up as poetry. To speak of the sea with awe now sounds childish. Yet awe once served a purpose. It kept people alert. It reminded them of limits. It preserved a space for caution to exist without apology. The romantic sea frightened because it was honest. The modern sea lies quietly. It waits beneath steel and schedules, unchanged by human confidence. It does not care that it has been rebranded. It does not respond to reassurance or refinement. Its depths remain what they have always been: vast, indifferent, and patient. But aboard the ship, this truth has no place. Romance has been removed because it interfered with certainty, and certainty in this age is more comforting than truth. So the sea is stripped of its voice, reduced to silence, beneath the hull no longer a force to negotiate with, but a surface assumed to comply. And in that assumption, something essential has already been lost. Instinct, when it surfaces in polite society, is expected to be corrected. It is a remnant of something untrained, something animal, something that belongs to servants, sailors, and children. Among well-bred women, instinct is regarded with suspicion. It disrupts posture. It interrupts conversation. It produces expressions that cannot be smoothed quickly enough. And so, from an early age, it is replaced with rules. Etiquette becomes the substitute. A woman learns to stand still even when uncomfortable, to smile when uncertain, to lower her voice when alarmed. Her body is trained to obey social expectation before internal warning. If something feels wrong, the first question she asks herself is not why, but whether it is appropriate to react at all. On board the ship, this training proves decisive. The setting demands composure. Corridors are narrow but elegant, shared with strangers whose eyes linger just long enough to register status. Meals are formal, governed by seating plans and unspoken hierarchies. Every public space functions as a stage, and every woman aboard understands her role instinctively, though instinct is no longer the word used. To react improperly would be unthinkable. A sudden noise in the hull, a vibration felt through the soles of one's shoes, a pause in the engines that lasts a second too long. Each of these moments produces a brief internal response, tightening, alertness, a flicker of unease. But the response is immediately evaluated. Is anyone else reacting? Has an officer spoken? Has protocol shifted? If not, the feeling is dismissed. Etiquette teaches that alarm without confirmation is embarrassing. Worse, it suggests fragility. A woman who draws attention to herself through visible fear risks social judgment far more immediate than any abstract danger. Her reputation travels faster than rumor, faster even than the ship, and so she corrects herself. She keeps her voice steady. She remains seated. She continues the conversation where it left off. Her body, trained for restraint, complies. Instinct is overridden by decorum, and decorum is rewarded with acceptance. The ship itself reinforces this hierarchy. Crew members respond to irregularities with practiced calm. They move efficiently but without urgency, careful not to disturb the atmosphere. Passengers are reassured not through explanation, but through tone. If something were truly wrong, they reason, surely the behavior would change. This logic is flawed, but it is deeply ingrained. Etiquette depends on signals. Instinct does not. When the two conflict, etiquette wins because it appears rational. It carries the weight of tradition, of upbringing, of every lesson learned about how a woman ought to behave when uncertain. Fear, unvalidated by authority, becomes shame. Even among friends, this restraint persists. A woman who feels uneasy searches the faces around her for permission to speak. Finding none, she remains silent. To voice concern would be to break the shared illusion of control, and illusion, at this moment, is what keeps everyone composed. The irony is quiet and cruel. Instinct evolved to preserve life. Etiquette evolved to preserve order. On land, the difference rarely matters. At sea, it becomes profound. Yet the women aboard are not foolish. They are obedient to a system that has rewarded obedience their entire lives. They have learned that safety comes from fitting in, from not making scenes, from trusting those above them in the social structure. So when uncertainty arises, it is handled politely. Eyes flick upward, then away. Hands tighten briefly around teacups. A breath is held, then released. Nothing is said, nothing is acknowledged. The moment passes, absorbed into the steady rhythm of the crossing. Instinct retreats, chastened. Etiquette resumes its place, smooth and unquestioned, guiding behavior with the quiet authority of habit. And beneath it all, unheeded and untrained, the body continues to notice what the mind has been taught to ignore. The journey is never described as optional. It is spoken of instead as expected, a natural extension of status, a marker of seriousness, a quiet test of belonging. To cross the ocean is to participate in the shared confidence of one's class. To remain behind is to mark oneself as hesitant, provincial, or worse, unprepared for the demands of modern life. Among the wealthy, movement becomes proof. Invitations assume travel. Engagements are arranged across borders. Marriages are negotiated with the understanding that distance is easily conquered. A woman who does not cross the sea risks falling out of rhythm with her peers, her absence noted politely and remembered unkindly. So the crossing acquires a moral weight. It is no longer simply transportation, it is demonstration. One proves one's steadiness, one's refinement, one's alignment with progress by stepping aboard without complaint. The ship becomes a floating examination hall, and the correct answer is composure. This expectation is reinforced subtly but constantly. Conversations before departure carry an air of inevitability. Of course you'll go. Everyone does now. It's quite routine. Each phrase smooths over any private reluctance, replacing it with the impression that refusal would be an eccentricity requiring explanation. And explanations, for women of standing, are dangerous. To decline travel invites speculation. Is she unwell, unstable, excessively nervous? Such questions attach themselves quickly and linger far longer than the crossing itself. Reputation, once unsettled, is difficult to reassemble. The safer course is always forward motion. Social obligation tightens most firmly around heiresses. Their presence is demanded not merely for pleasure but for legitimacy. They are expected at functions abroad, introduced into circles that affirm alliances and reinforce hierarchies. Their absence would be noticed as an absence of endorsement. The crossing, therefore, becomes service performed not for oneself, but for family, name, and fortune. This service is rarely acknowledged as such. Instead, it is framed as privilege. How fortunate you are to travel. What an opportunity. Gratitude is expected in return, and gratitude silences dissent efficiently. To complain about obligation while benefiting from wealth is considered poor form. So women learn to desire what is demanded of them. They speak of anticipation rather than apprehension. They discuss arrangements with enthusiasm carefully cultivated. Any flicker of doubt is smoothed away before it can harden into resistance. The language of choice is adopted, even when choice was never truly offered. The ship's departure becomes a public affirmation. Those left behind wave with confidence, satisfied that duty has been fulfilled. Those aboard smile back, relieved to have met expectation. The moment is performative on both sides, a shared reassurance that everything is proceeding as it should. Even private misgivings are reframed. A woman who feels unsettled tells herself she is merely tired, or overwhelmed by preparations, or sensitive to change. None of these feelings are permitted to alter the plan. Social obligation does not pause for emotional weather. The crossing must happen. It is remarkable how quickly obligation masquerades as inevitability. Once the ticket is purchased, once the trunk is packed, once the date is announced, the journey acquires momentum independent of personal feeling. To stop it would require justification stronger than fear. And fear, in this context, lacks standing. It has no social authority, no respected advocate. It cannot be cited politely, so it is set aside, dismissed as a private weakness rather than a relevant consideration. The ship pulls away, carrying this unspoken contract with it, the understanding that progress requires participation, and participation requires silence. The women stand on deck not because they are reckless, but because the crossing has been framed as something one simply does, like marriage, like inheritance, like obedience to the world as it has been arranged. The sea stretches ahead, indifferent to obligation. But obligation presses harder than the horizon, urging the ship forward with the quiet force of expectation fulfilled. Night arrives without ceremony. There is no moment when the sea announces itself as dark, only the gradual thinning of light. the soft withdrawal of color, until the water becomes a single moving shadow. Lamps along the decks flicker on in sequence, their glow steady and reassuring, as if darkness itself has been anticipated and contained. Inside, the ship transforms. Corridors glow with a warmer light, carpeting muffles footsteps, and the sharp scent of coal gives way to polish, perfume, and fabric warmed by bodies. Doors close gently. Trunks are unpacked just enough to establish familiarity. A woman's world compresses into a cabin measured carefully to feel private without ever being isolated. This is intentional. The first night is designed to soothe. Dinner is served promptly, courses arriving with practiced precision. Conversation remains light, floating safely above topics that might disturb digestion or sleep. The crossing has begun, but it is spoken of as though it were already behind them. Above deck, the sea disappears. Windows reflect lamplight instead of darkness. The horizon is erased. What remains is interior music drifting from a salon, the clink of glass, the low murmur of voices shaped by restraint. The ship encourages attention inward, away from the vastness it cuts through. For many women, this is a relief. Night on land has rules. Night at sea feels unfamiliar only briefly, before routine settles in. Stewards move quietly, anticipating needs before they are voiced. Blankets are offered, curtains drawn. Every gesture communicates care. You are being looked after. You may rest, and rest they do. The engines hum steadily beneath the floor, a vibration too constant to be alarming. It becomes a lullaby, mechanical, precise, relentless. Unlike wind or wave, it does not change tone. It suggests vigilance without requiring awareness. This steadiness has an effect. Bodies relax, shoulders lower, breath slows. Any unease carried aboard dissolves into the rhythm of movement. If the sea is there at all, it is sensed only indirectly, translated into something manageable and regular. Cabins are sealed against sound and sight. Portholes are small, often curtained, allowing only a suggestion of night beyond. There is nothing to watch, nothing to interpret. The darkness outside is abstract, made distant by design. The woman inside her cabin is invited to forget where she is. She undresses methodically, jewelry placed carefully, gloves folded, corset loosened with the practiced patience of habit. Each action grounds her in normalcy. This is not an emergency. It is an evening like any other, merely displaced. Sleep arrives unevenly. Some drift easily, soothed by motion and exhaustion. Others wake briefly, disoriented, listening for something they cannot name. A creak here, a distant metallic sigh. Each sound is new, yet none persist long enough to demand interpretation. The ship breathes, and the body learns its cadence. When doubt surfaces, it is quickly corrected. Surely this is how all ships sound at night. Surely engineers accounted for this. Surely thousands have slept like this before. The mind assembles reassurance from familiar fragments and settles again. No one speaks of contingency. There is no conversation about what one would do if something changed. No drills, no instructions shared in confidence. The absence itself is comforting. It suggests there is nothing to prepare for. Above, the sea continues its patient movement, unseen and unacknowledged. Below, in the privacy of cabins, women surrender consciousness one by one, trusting the vessel to remain what it has presented itself to be: stable, attentive, sufficient. The first night passes quietly. And in that quiet, belief deepens. The crossing begins to feel inevitable rather than ongoing. The ship moves forward through darkness while its passengers sleep, confident that whatever is required will be handled without disturbing them. By morning, the sea will feel even farther away. For now, the night seals the illusion, completely wrapping steel, water, and risk in soft lamplight and steady sound, and teaching everyone aboard the same lesson. Nothing has happened. Therefore, nothing will. Long before the sea ever enters their lives, obedience is taught as refinement. In high-ceilinged rooms far from salt air, girls are trained to master themselves. Finishing schools do not advertise submission, but they cultivate it carefully, wrapped in grace, framed as poise, rewarded with approval. A young woman learns early that composure is currency, and that the surest way to lose it is to question too loudly. Lessons are subtle but relentless. She is instructed in posture before opinion, silence before interruption, agreement before objection. Her voice is shaped to be pleasant rather than persuasive, her movements economical rather than expressive. Instinct, when it flares, is gently corrected. That is not becoming. That is unnecessary. That is not how one behaves. Compliance is praised as maturity. A girl who adapts quickly is called sensible. One who accepts instruction without protest is described as promising. Those who resist, who ask why rather than how, are quietly redirected, their energy smoothed down until it no longer disrupts the room. This education does not prepare her to act. It prepares her to endure. Fear is not addressed directly, it is reclassified. Anxiety becomes nerves. Discomfort becomes fussiness. A sense that something is wrong is treated not as information, but as a flaw to be corrected. The correct response is always internal. Adjust yourself, not the situation. By the time she is grown, this habit is automatic. When authority speaks, she listens. When experts explain, she accepts. When systems present themselves as benevolent, she does not probe for weakness. Her education has taught her that resistance is impolite and suspicion unsightly. The ship fits seamlessly into this training. It is an institution, complete with uniforms, rules, and hierarchies. It speaks the language she understands. Officers move with confidence. Schedules are posted. Expectations are clear. Nothing about it invites challenge. Everything about it rewards trust. When instructions are given, they are given politely and therefore obeyed. A woman raised in finishing rooms recognizes the pattern instantly. She knows how to behave in structured environments. She knows how to follow cues, how to wait for permission, how to interpret calm authority as safety. The ship does not feel foreign. It feels familiar. Even uncertainty is handled according to protocol. If something feels amiss, she looks first to others. Is anyone reacting? Has an official acknowledged it? Without these signals, the feeling is dismissed. Acting independently would be inappropriate. It would suggest a lack of discipline. This conditioning is powerful, precisely because it is invisible. No one tells her she must comply. She simply knows that compliance is how one moves through the world successfully. It has kept her safe before safe from embarrassment, from censure, from social exile. Why should it fail her now? The finishing school did not teach her how to survive disaster. It taught her how to behave while things appear normal. And appearances, she has learned, matter more than internal alarms. They dictate response. They determine reality. So when the sea surrounds her and the ship advances steadily, she trusts the structure she has been given. She assumes that if action were required, she would be instructed. She assumes that those in charge would know first. She has been trained not to act without permission. This training has been praised all her life as elegance, as civilization, as self-control. It has won her approval in drawing rooms and dining halls. It has made her acceptable. But the sea does not recognize etiquette. It does not reward compliance. And yet, standing on the deck, wrapped in education that taught her to quiet herself before questioning the world, she does what she has always been taught to do best. She waits. Authority in these lives has a signature. It appears at the bottom of documents, on the corner of letters, in the neat approval of arrangements already decided. A father's name carries weight long before his daughter understands what it permits. It opens doors. It settles questions. It moves money and people with the quiet confidence of permanence. When the tickets are purchased, they are rarely purchased by the women who will use them. They are signed for approved, sanctioned, rendered sensible by paternal judgment. A father reviews the route, the company, the departure date. He consults men who speak his language, shipping agents, engineers, other fathers. They reassure one another with statistics and reputation. This is how risk is managed collectively, rationally, at a distance. By the time the decision reaches the daughter, it is no longer a decision. It is an arrangement, a plan, a matter already settled. To object would be to challenge not only the voyage, but the authority that has guided her entire life. And that authority has, until now, proven reliable. Fathers see the world differently. They are accustomed to delegating danger. They navigate risk through contracts and intermediaries. The sea, to them, is not a presence, it is a problem already solved by men whose profession it is to solve such things. If they do not feel fear, it does not occur to them that fear might be relevant. This confidence is not malicious, it is inherited. They remember earlier eras as less refined, more precarious. They have lived through improvements and accepted them eagerly. Trains replaced carriages, gas replaced candles, steel replaced wood. Each change promised safety, efficiency, control. Each time, trust was rewarded often enough to become habit. So when they sign the tickets, they do so without hesitation. The ship is modern, the route well-traveled, the company reputable. The crossing has been made countless times. In their minds, danger belongs to extremes, storms, wars, failures of character. It does not belong to routine. And this crossing has been framed as routine. A father may clasp his daughter's hand at the pier, offer a final word of advice, practical, affectionate, firm. Write when you arrive. Rest well. Enjoy the journey. His tone conveys certainty, not bravado but assurance. He believes he has done his duty by selecting wisely. In this moment, his confidence becomes instruction. A daughter raised to trust paternal judgment absorbs it instinctively. If her father is calm, then calm must be appropriate. If he is unconcerned, then concern would be excessive. She carries his certainty aboard with her, tucked beside gloves and letters, a silent inheritance heavier than any trunk. Even fathers who worry rarely express it. They understand that doubt undermines authority. To show hesitation now would invite questions they cannot answer without admitting uncertainty. And uncertainty, for a man responsible for others, feels like failure. So fear is withheld. It remains unspoken, rationalized away, smoothed into confidence before it can trouble anyone else. The signature at the bottom of the ticket stands as proof that all necessary thought has already been applied. The irony is subtle and profound. Fathers believe they are protecting their daughters by choosing the safest option available. They do not imagine that safety itself might be misunderstood, that the absence of visible danger might conceal conditions far beyond their influence. They have not been taught to imagine catastrophe within systems they trust, and so they wave from the pier, satisfied that arrangements have been made correctly. They return home to offices and routines, confident that progress has carried their daughters securely forward. Out at sea, the ship continues on its course. The tickets, once signed, have fulfilled their purpose. They have transformed obligation into inevitability, choice into compliance, and trust into motion. And somewhere between shore and horizon, a woman carries her father's certainty with her, believing, as she has been taught, that protection lies in the decisions already made on her behalf. Chaperonage is meant to reassure. It appears as presence, another woman in the cabin, a relative at table, a familiar figure moving through public spaces with practiced ease. It signals propriety. It promises oversight. It suggests that nothing improper, nothing unsafe, could occur while such watchfulness exists. But presence is not the same as protection. On board the ship, chaperones fulfill a social function long perfected on land. They ensure conversations remain suitable. They observe posture, dress, timing. They intervene when boundaries blur between acquaintances. Their vigilance is tuned to reputation, not to risk. This distinction is rarely acknowledged. A woman accompanied by a mother, an aunt, or an older companion is assumed to be guarded in all respects. The label itself carries comfort. It implies that someone is watching, that someone will know what to do should difficulty arise. Yet chaperones have not been trained for emergencies. Their authority does not extend beyond etiquette. They know how to navigate seating arrangements and introductions. They understand when to excuse themselves and when to remain. They can deflect impropriety with a glance or a word, but they have not been taught how to respond when systems fail. On the ship, their role remains unchanged. They move through salons and corridors with quiet confidence, reinforcing normalcy through familiarity. Their calm reassures younger women, who look to them instinctively for cues. If the chaperone is untroubled, then nothing is wrong. If she continues her routine, then routine must still apply. This dependence is powerful. A younger woman who feels a flicker of unease suppresses it when her companion shows none. To contradict the chaperone's composure would feel disrespectful, almost disobedient. The hierarchy of age and experience asserts itself, silencing instinct through deference. Chaperonage becomes a shared performance. Both women participate in maintaining the illusion. The elder offers reassurance through demeanor. The younger accepts it gratefully, relieved of the burden of independent judgment. Responsibility is transferred upward, where it dissolves into tradition rather than action. The ship encourages this transfer. Public spaces are designed to be visible, orderly, supervised. There is always someone nearby, someone official, someone older. Privacy exists only within the narrow confines of cabins. Everywhere else, behavior is implicitly observed, regulated by social expectation. This environment feels safe because it feels watched. But watching for impropriety is not the same as watching for danger. The chaperone's gaze scans for breaches of decorum, not for structural concerns or environmental threats. Her attention is trained inward, towards social equilibrium rather than outward toward the sea. When uncertainty arises, she relies on the same assumptions as everyone else. Surely the crew would inform us if there were cause for concern. Surely this has happened before. Surely the ship would not continue as it is if something were amiss. These thoughts are not spoken, but they govern response all the same. And so the chaperone remains calm. She suggests tea. She proposes rest. She redirects conversation. Her tools are familiar, refined, and wholly inadequate for the circumstances she has never been asked to imagine. The younger woman watches and follows. This dynamic has been rehearsed for years at dinners, at dances, at journeys shorter and safer. It has always worked before. There is no reason, she tells herself, to believe it will fail now. Yet the illusion of chaperonage depends on conditions remaining within the bounds of social order. It presumes that danger announces itself politely, that it allows time for consultation, that it respects hierarchy. It assumes that if something were truly wrong, someone else, someone authorized, would intervene first. The sea makes no such allowances. But aboard the ship, surrounded by the reassuring choreography of accompaniment and oversight, women mistake supervision for safety. They trust the presence of others to compensate for the absence of preparation. Chaperonage, so effective at preserving reputation, quietly replaces vigilance. And in that exchange, something vital is surrendered, not deliberately, not foolishly, but politely, in the manner they have been taught is always correct. Clothing, in this world, is never neutral. It shapes the body long before it adorns it, teaching restraint through fabric and pressure. A woman's garments are designed not merely to present her, but to manage her, her posture, her movement, her breath. From the first tightening of stays, she learns that comfort is secondary to appearance, and that endurance is a quiet virtue. On board the ship, this lesson travels with her. Silk rustles softly as she walks, skirts brushing the narrow corridors with practiced care. Corsets hold the torso upright, compressing the lungs just enough to encourage shallow, measured breathing. The body is kept contained, disciplined into predictability. Sudden movement is discouraged by design. Speed feels improper, almost impossible. This containment is familiar. She has lived within it for years, navigating rooms and expectations with a body trained to remain composed under pressure. The weight of fabric reminds her constantly to move deliberately, to sit carefully, to rise without haste. Even rest requires management. Corsets loosened, not removed. Layers adjusted, not discarded. At sea, these constraints acquire new meaning. The ship's architecture is narrow, its stairways steep, its spaces compact. Movement requires balance and foresight. Yet the clothing allows little margin for either. A quick turn is difficult. A deep breath is restricted. Kneeling, climbing, or sudden exertion are rendered awkward, ungainly. No one speaks of this. The garments are symbols of status, propriety, and femininity. To question their suitability would be to question identity itself. A woman dressed otherwise would draw attention unwanted, disapproving, and attention, as she has been taught, is something to avoid. So she accepts the limits imposed upon her body. Even discomfort is internalized as normal. Tightness is expected. Fatigue is personal. If movement feels difficult, she assumes the fault lies with her, not with the clothing. This reflex is well practiced. The ship reinforces it subtly. Public spaces reward stillness. Seating is arranged to encourage lingering rather than motion. Conversation unfolds slowly, uninterrupted by urgency. There is no reason, she is led to believe, to move quickly or forcefully. Everything necessary will come to her. This belief is seductive. Contained bodies feel safe bodies. Restrained movement suggests control. The woman feels protected by her layers, buffered from the unfamiliar environment by fabric and formality. The sea outside seems distant, unreal, filtered through portholes and propriety alike. Yet containment is not protection. The same garments that signal refinement also inhibit response. They limit reach, reduce speed, constrain endurance. In moments requiring decisiveness, they impose hesitation. In situations demanding physical action, they demand negotiation buttons undone, skirts gathered, laces loosened. Time is required, but time is the one resource never guaranteed at sea. Still, the women do not imagine such moments. Their clothing, like their education, presumes continuity. It is designed for controlled environments where interruptions are announced and assistance is available. It does not account for chaos. The corset holds fast through the night, reminding the body to remain composed even in sleep. Dreams are shallow, breath restrained, movement minimized. The discipline never fully releases. By morning, the woman wakes already prepared to comply with schedule, with expectation, with the shape her body has been trained to maintain. She dresses carefully, reinforcing the containment she has learned to equate with safety. Silks smooth, laces tighten. The body is once again arranged into acceptability, and beneath it all the truth remains unspoken, that containment has been mistaken for security, that restraint has been confused with readiness, and that the very garments signaling safety may one day prevent escape. For now, they gleam softly under lamplight, elegant, constricting, unquestioned, holding women beautifully still as the ship continues forward, indifferent to how little room they have been given to move. Fear, in polite society, is expected to arrive quietly or not at all. When it does appear, it is greeted with correction rather than concern, a raised eyebrow, a soft laugh, a phrase offered kindly but firmly. There's no need for that. Fear is not debated, it is smoothed away. It is treated as a lapse in manners, a temporary failure of composure best resolved through restraint. From girlhood onward, women learn this reflex. They learn that fear must be justified before it may be expressed, and even then, only briefly. It must be framed as concern, not alarm, as sensitivity, not warning. To speak of fear plainly is to risk appearing overwrought, unreliable, even embarrassing. Better to keep it internal, where it cannot disrupt the atmosphere. On the ship, this lesson governs every reaction. A sudden shudder beneath the feet, an unfamiliar sound echoing through the hull, a pause barely perceptible in the steady pulse of the engines. Each of these moments produces a flicker of awareness, a tightening in the chest, a question forming uninvited. But the question is never allowed to finish. The woman looks around instinctively, searching for cues. Are others reacting? Has anyone spoken? Is there a change in posture, in tone, in procedure? When she finds none, her fear is immediately reclassified not as information but as error. I must be imagining it. I am tired. I am being foolish. This internal correction is swift and practiced. It restores equilibrium without external intervention. The fear is pressed down, contained beneath layers of reason and etiquette until it loses urgency. What remains is a faint unease, easy to ignore. Conversation resumes. A remark is made about the weather, a compliment offered on attire. The social surface smooths itself automatically, as it has been trained to do. Fear dissolves into politeness, and politeness is rewarded with normalcy. The ship's environment supports this suppression. Everything about it encourages calm. The lighting remains steady, the crew's demeanor unchanged. Meals are served on time. Music continues without interruption. These signals communicate a single message. Nothing requires your attention. To persist in fear under such conditions feels inappropriate. Even when unease returns, it does so privately. A woman feels it while standing alone at the rail, or lying awake in her cabin, listening too carefully to the sounds around her. But she has learned that fear without witnesses carries little authority. Without validation, it is not to be trusted. So she says nothing. She adjusts her posture. She breathes more slowly. She reminds herself of the assurances she has been given by doctors, by engineers, by fathers, by experience itself. She rehearses the logic of safety until it feels sufficient. Fear is not banished. It is managed. This management becomes a shared endeavor. Women observe one another, taking comfort in collective composure. Each calm face reinforces the belief that fear is unnecessary. Each untroubled expression serves as evidence against the body's quiet insistence that something is amiss. And so, fear becomes isolating. To feel it is to feel alone. To express it would be to break the unspoken agreement that sustains order. No one wants to be the first to disrupt the calm, to introduce uncertainty into a space so carefully maintained. The result is silence not imposed but chosen. A silence filled with reassurance, with habit, with trust in appearances. A silence that allows the ship to move forward unchallenged, carrying with it a community trained to correct itself before questioning the world around it. In this way, fear is not eradicated. It is refined into something acceptable only when invisible. It is allowed to exist only so long as it does not ask for action. And as the crossing continues, the women grow more adept at this suppression, at smiling through uncertainty, at folding apprehension neatly into the corners of their lives. They have been taught well. But fear, when denied its voice, does not disappear. It waits patient, observant, unchanged, until the moment when politeness can no longer contain it, and the cost of silence becomes impossible to ignore. Status is learned as protection long before it is tested. A woman of means grows up surrounded by evidence that rank insulates. Doors open, voices soften. Disputes are resolved quietly, often before they are felt. Money absorbs friction. Lineage deflects scrutiny. Over time, this insulation is mistaken for safety itself. The world has yielded so consistently that it begins to feel designed to do so. On board the ship, this belief travels intact. First-class corridors are wider, brighter, calmer. Carpets thicken beneath the feet. The air smells of polish and restraint rather than oil and labor. Stewards address passengers by title, by name, by deference, learned and rehearsed. The hierarchy is visible and reassuring. It suggests order. It suggests that whatever happens will happen correctly. Rank becomes a language. It speaks in seating arrangements, in access to spaces, in the quiet assurance that one will be informed first, assisted promptly, spared inconvenience. A woman accustomed to such privileges assumes without ever articulating it that danger, if it exists at all, will respect the same boundaries as society. This assumption is subtle, but powerful. She has been protected before by her position. When illness threatened, doctors arrived quickly. When scandal loomed, it was managed discreetly. When travel proved uncomfortable, accommodations were adjusted. Experience has taught her that problems bend around her rather than break through. The ship appears to confirm this lesson. The most desirable cabins are far from the engines, insulated from noise and vibration. Dining is elegant, unhurried, insulated from the physical realities of the crossing. The sea is something glimpsed at leisure, framed by railings and propriety. It does not intrude. This separation fosters a dangerous confidence. If difficulty were to arise, surely it would announce itself through proper channels. Surely officers would come to the first-class deck first. Surely assistance would be prioritized according to standing. This is not cruelty, it is how the world has always worked. Below decks, others may struggle. That is understood, if rarely considered. But here, among polished surfaces and practiced courtesy, the assumption persists. Rank confers attention, and attention ensures safety. The woman wears this belief like armor. It shields her from imagining vulnerability. It dulls the edge of awareness that might otherwise sharpen at sea. She feels buffered, insulated not just by walls and attendants, but by the invisible force of social order itself. Even when uncertainty flickers, it is reframed through this lens. If something were wrong, surely those of importance would already be responding. The absence of alarm becomes proof of protection. Silence is interpreted as control, not as omission. The irony is cruelly precise. Social rank protects reputation, comfort, and convenience. It does not protect bodies from physics, steel from strain, or water from gravity. The sea does not recognize titles. It does not observe class distinctions. It does not slow for privilege. But aboard the ship, this truth feels abstract. Rank has always worked before. It has softened hardship, redirected consequence, deferred discomfort. Why should it fail now, on a vessel designed specifically to cater to it? So women settle deeper into the routines of their class. They dress for dinner, they attend gatherings, they discuss trivialities with the ease of those who expect continuity. Their confidence is not loud, it is assumed. It rests on a lifetime of evidence, suggesting that the world will arrange itself accordingly. This belief is reinforced by every small courtesy. A door held open, a question answered promptly, a request fulfilled without delay. Each interaction affirms the same message. You are seen, you are valued, you are protected. Yet protection has limits no one names. The armor of rank is ceremonial. It gleams under lamplight, impressive and reassuring. But it is not forged for catastrophe. It has never been tested against indifference on a massive scale. Still, the women trust it. They stand at the rail with confidence shaped by inheritance, believing that if danger exists, it will navigate the same hierarchies they have always known. They do not imagine a force that ignores rank entirely. The ship moves forward, carrying this unspoken faith with it, this conviction that status itself is a safeguard. And beneath it all, the sea waits, unimpressed, patient, and utterly uninterested in who has been taught to feel untouchable. The cabin is meant to feel like refuge. Its dimensions are calculated to soothe rather than prepare. Walls are softened with paneling, corners rounded, fabrics chosen to absorb sound, to quiet movement, to suggest enclosure rather than exposure. The space does not remind its occupant that she is at sea. It reminds her of rooms she already trusts. This is deliberate. The ship's designers understand psychology as well as engineering. Fear thrives in vastness, in echo, in exposure. Comfort, by contrast, flourishes in intimacy. So cabins are arranged to feel contained, insulated from the scale of what surrounds them. The sea is kept outside, reduced to a distant suggestion rather than a presence. For the women who inhabit them, this works immediately. A bed neatly turned down, a washstand secured against motion, personal items arranged just so, creating continuity with life on land. The cabin becomes a private world, complete in itself. Within these walls, the crossing feels theoretical rather than real. But comfort has consequences. The cabin offers no orientation. Once the door is closed, there is little sense of direction. No clear indication of where one is, in relation to the deck, the exits, the waterline. Corridors beyond the door are identical, repeating patterns designed to maintain elegance rather than clarity. Familiarity replaces awareness. A woman learns her route from cabin to dining room, from salon to promenade. These paths are well lit, gently guided by carpet and decor. But alternate routes, those leading upward quickly, outward urgently, are not emphasized. They exist, but they are not taught. There is no map offered, no rehearsal of movement. The assumption is implicit. There will be time. If one ever needs to leave the cabin quickly, assistance will be provided, directions will be given, order will prevail. The woman is not expected to navigate independently. The cabin reinforces this expectation. Its door closes firmly, sealing sound and sight alike. Inside, the ship feels stable, unmoving. The sea could be roaring or silent, it makes little difference here. This isolation encourages surrender. The woman changes clothes, reads, rests, sleeps. She is protected from sensation, and sensation is what might otherwise provoke awareness. At night, this isolation deepens. The corridor lights dim, sounds soften. The cabin becomes a pocket of calm floating within something much larger. Yet that largeness remains abstract. The woman drifts between sleep and wakefulness without ever needing to acknowledge where she is. Escape is not considered because escape is not imaginable. The cabin has been designed to discourage urgency. There is no alarm bell within reach, no clear signal that might pierce the insulation. The door is heavy, reassuring, solid. It suggests permanence, security. But security and safety are not the same. In an emergency, the cabin becomes a boundary rather than a refuge. Its comfort's slow response. Its isolation delays awareness. The very qualities that make it pleasant make it dangerous when conditions change. Yet the women do not question this design. Why would they? On land, private rooms protect. They are sanctuaries. They separate danger from domesticity. The cabin borrows this symbolism, inviting trust through resemblance. So the woman settles into her space. She places personal items where they belong. She unpins her hair. She loosens her corset slightly and breathes more freely. The cabin receives her compliance gladly, wrapping it in quiet and warmth. Outside, the ship continues its steady advance. Inside, the woman rests, confident that if anything were required of her, she would be told, that someone would knock, that instructions would come, that comfort would not deceive. The cabin, after all, was designed for her benefit. It was never designed to teach her how to leave it. The servants notice first. They always do, not because they are wiser, but because their lives depend on attention. They listen differently. They watch systems rather than surfaces. They know the sounds of labor, the rhythms of machinery, the small deviations that signal strain. Where passengers hear reassurance, servants hear variance. Below decks, the ship tells a different story. The air is warmer, heavier, threaded with oil and metal. The hum of engines is not a lullaby here, but a language, subtle shifts in pitch, vibrations that travel through souls and bones. Stewards and maids learn these signals quickly, because to ignore them is to be caught unprepared when routine falters. They move through spaces designed for efficiency, not illusion. Corridors are narrower, lighting harsher. Doors are functional rather than elegant. There is no attempt to soften reality here. The ship is felt as mass, pressure, motion. Its power is undeniable. Its moods are noticed. And with notice comes unease. A steward pauses longer than necessary at a bulkhead, listening. A maid hesitates when the floor feels different beneath her feet, tilted just enough to register, not enough to alarm officially. These moments do not prompt panic, but they accumulate. Servants collect them the way sailors once collected weather signs. They exchange glances, quiet remarks, half-finished sentences, but they do not speak openly. Their position does not allow it. A servant's role is to reassure, not to question, to deliver calm, upward, not doubt. If they appear anxious, it unsettles those above them, and unsettling passengers is considered failure. So knowledge remains contained below. When servants speak, they soften their words. They defer. They phrase concerns as observations, not warnings. It's probably nothing. Ships do this sometimes. I'm sure the officers know. These qualifiers protect them from accusation, from dismissal, from reprimand. They have learned the cost of certainty. A servant who speaks too plainly risks being labeled dramatic, ignorant, troublesome. Authority belongs to officers, engineers, men with titles. Servants are expected to respond, not interpret. Yet their bodies continue to notice. They feel the ship's labor in their joints, the heat of effort, the subtle urgency in movements below deck. They sense when routine becomes strained. They understand that systems, however advanced, require vigilance, and they know intimately that when something fails, it is rarely announced politely. This knowledge isolates them. Passengers glide past, insulated by comfort and confidence. Servants pass among them carrying trays, adjusting curtains, offering reassurances learned by heart. Their faces remain composed, their voices steady. They perform calm, even when they do not feel it, because they have no choice. The hierarchy of the ship demands it. Calm must move upward, doubt must stay below. If concern exists, it is to be handled by those authorized to handle it. And authorization does not extend to those who scrub floors or make beds. So servants adapt. They watch more closely. They memorize routes. They keep mental notes of stairways and exits. They carry their awareness quietly, like contraband, not to cause alarm, but to be ready if readiness becomes possible. Some have crossed many times before. They have seen small incidents handled smoothly, reassurances proven correct. This history tempers fear but does not erase caution. Experience teaches them that routine can mask risk, that calm can precede chaos. Still, they remain silent. They know their warnings would likely be ignored or worse, ridiculed, and so they continue their work, attentive and composed, trusting their instincts only enough to stay alert, not enough to act. The tragedy is not that servants know better. It is that knowing better carries no authority. Their awareness, sharp and practiced, is trapped beneath layers of deference and decorum. It cannot travel upward without permission. It cannot interrupt the illusion of control so carefully maintained above. And so the ship moves forward with its knowledge divided. Above decks, confidence reigns unquestioned, serene, assured. Below, understanding gathers quietly, unshared, unable to change course. The servants keep watching. They have learned to do so without expectation, without acknowledgement, without hope that observation alone will ever be enough. Because on a ship built on hierarchy, awareness does not equal power, and those who sense danger earliest are often the least able to name it aloud. Rules have a peculiar longevity. They persist long after the conditions that required them have vanished, preserved by habit rather than usefulness. On land, this is often harmless, a custom kept out of politeness, a phrase repeated without meaning. At sea, the consequences are heavier. There, rules are meant to govern survival. Yet many aboard these ships obey traditions shaped for a world that no longer exists. The ship is modern. The rules are not. Procedures are followed because they have always been followed. Hierarchies are respected because they have always been respected. Authority flows downward along channels laid decades earlier, when sail ruled and danger announced itself with time to respond. Those structures remain intact, even as the pace of disaster has changed. Passengers are instructed to wait. They are told implicitly and explicitly that movement without direction is improper. That initiative belongs to officers. That order prevents chaos. This logic has merit in theory. In practice, it assumes that time will always be granted, that warnings will always be clear, that authority will always arrive before necessity. Women, especially, are bound tightly by these expectations. They are taught that compliance is not only correct, but virtuous. To follow instructions is to contribute to safety. To act independently is to risk disorder. And disorder in this moral framework is the greater threat. So they wait. They wait for announcements, for confirmation, for signals delivered in official tones. They do not ask where exits are, unless prompted. They do not rehearse movement because rehearsal implies expectation of failure. To expect failure would be unseemly. The rules discourage anticipation. Drills are rare or absent. Instructions are vague, offered as reassurance rather than preparation. Life-saving measures exist, but they are treated as symbols rather than tools, evidence of care, not devices meant for urgent use. The language surrounding them is telling. In the unlikely event, should it become necessary. As a precaution, these phrases soften reality, transforming action into abstraction. They suggest that danger is theoretical, distant, improbable. Rules are presented as formalities rather than necessities. And so familiarity replaces readiness. A woman may pass a lifeboat daily without considering how to reach it quickly, or whether she could enter it unaided. She may know it exists without knowing how it functions. The rule has been satisfied, the equipment is present. The reasoning behind it has been forgotten. Crew members, bound by the same outdated structures, hesitate to disrupt calm. They wait for authorization before alarming passengers. They follow chains of command designed to preserve order rather than speed. Each level assumes the next will decide when action is required. Responsibility diffuses upward until it dissolves into procedure. This diffusion feels safe. Rules promise predictability. They provide comfort in uncertainty. They allow individuals to defer judgment to structure. No one is required to decide alone. No one is required to imagine the unthinkable. But the unthinkable does not consult rules. It does not respect chains of command or await formal acknowledgement. It unfolds according to physics, not protocol. When reality shifts quickly, rules that require time become liabilities. Yet aboard the ship, no one questions them. They have worked before, or seemed to. They are embedded in training, in expectation, in the very architecture of the vessel. To challenge them would be to challenge the entire system that claims to ensure safety. And systems, especially modern ones, are difficult to doubt. Women feel this acutely. They have been trained to rely on structure, not to interrogate it. When rules persist, they assume purpose. When instructions are absent, they assume patience is required. So they remain where they are told. They trust that if movement becomes necessary, it will be ordered, that if urgency exists, it will be declared, that the rules governing their behavior are still aligned with reality. But rules do not adapt on their own. They must be questioned, revised, abandoned when reason demands it. Aboard these ships, that reckoning has not yet occurred. The rules remain polished, authoritative, and quietly obsolete. They stand ready to be obeyed. Whether they are ready to save anyone is another matter entirely. For these women, catastrophe is theoretical. It exists in newspapers, in distant places, attached to names that do not belong to their circles. Disasters happen to others, to the careless, the poor, the unlucky, the improperly advised. Their own lives have unfolded within a framework that absorbs shock before it reaches them. When difficulties arise, they are managed. When danger threatens, it is softened, redirected, or quietly resolved. The world, as they know it, has been reliable. Illness was met with physicians who arrived promptly. Financial instability was handled by trustees and solicitors. Social missteps were corrected with discretion. Even grief, when it came, was structured, mourned within rituals that made it bearable. Nothing had ever truly collapsed around them. This history shapes expectation more powerfully than instruction. A woman who has never seen a system fail has no reason to imagine that it might. She has lived within networks that functioned smoothly enough to feel permanent. The idea that something could simply give way suddenly, irreversibly, feels almost indecent. So, she trusts. She trusts the ship because she has trusted everything else that carried authority. She trusts the schedule because time has always kept its promises. She trusts the sea because it has been presented to her as tamed, domesticated, reduced to a route rather than a force. Her confidence is not arrogance. It is experience. Every crossing she has known by carriage, by train, by earlier voyages ended as expected. Arrivals occurred, luggage appeared, life resumed, even discomfort proved temporary. There was always a next step, a solution waiting politely to be applied. This continuity becomes belief. Belief that problems are finite, that solutions exist in advance, that someone, somewhere, has already accounted for whatever might go wrong. It is a comforting belief, reinforced by decades of evidence drawn from privilege. The ship seems to embody this promise. It is orderly, deliberate, impressive. Its sheer scale suggests capability. Its routines suggest mastery. Nothing about it hints at fragility. To imagine failure here would be to contradict everything she has been taught about progress and protection, and so she does not imagine it. When the ship creaks, she assumes it always has. When the sea darkens, she assumes it will pass. When unease surfaces, she recalls all the times it proved unnecessary before. Her memory becomes her shield. This is the danger of an unbroken past. It conditions the mind to expect continuity, even when conditions change. It replaces vigilance with precedent. The absence of failure becomes proof that failure cannot occur. Yet the sea has no memory of her safety. It has never cared that systems worked before. It does not recognize patterns of success as guarantees. Its indifference is absolute, but this truth remains abstract to those who have never needed to confront it directly. So, the woman moves through the ship with quiet assurance. She attends dinner. She retires to her cabin. She sleeps. The world has always supported her before. There is no reason to believe it will stop now. This belief is not foolish, it is earned. Earned through years of insulation, through structures that held, through dangers that were distant enough to be theoretical. It is the natural outcome of a life where catastrophe has always been someone else's story. But history does not repeat itself out of courtesy. It waits for moments when belief outruns reality, when confidence becomes habit, when preparation is replaced by assumption. It waits for those who cannot imagine failure because they have never needed to survive it. The ship carries forward this quiet certainty, a certainty built not on recklessness, but on experience untested by collapse. And as it moves deeper into open water, it carries with it a generation shaped by a world that had never failed them, unprepared for the moment when it finally will. The deck is arranged as a promise. It stretches wide and clean beneath the sky, bordered by rails polished to a soft sheen, inviting hands to rest and eyes to wander. Nothing here suggests urgency. Nothing implies danger. The deck is not a place to prepare. It is a place to be seen. Women step onto it as they would into a garden. Their movements slow instinctively, guided by the unspoken etiquette of promenade. Walking becomes a ritual, measured, conversational, attentive to posture rather than footing. The sea rolls beside them, but it is framed by elegance, reduced to scenery that enhances the experience rather than interrupts it. This is intentional. Decks are designed to project mastery. The openness reassures. The symmetry calms. The presence of others strolling, chatting, pausing at the rail confirms that everything is proceeding correctly. Danger does not belong in such a setting. It would feel out of place, almost rude. Here, the ship performs confidence. Chairs are placed to encourage lingering. Rugs soften the metal beneath. The space invites observation rather than vigilance. Women lean on the rail not to gauge the sea's mood, but to be admired against it. The ocean becomes backdrop to silhouette, a moving canvas that flatters. Conversation flows easily. Talk turns to weather, to destinations, to acquaintances glimpsed across the deck. The crossing is discussed as an experience to be enjoyed, not endured. The deck offers the illusion of participation without responsibility, a way to feel present while remaining protected. The rail itself reinforces this illusion. It is solid, reassuring, high enough to suggest security. It gives the impression that the boundary between human order and natural chaos has been firmly established. The sea may exist beyond it, but it cannot intrude. Women trust this boundary implicitly. They have been taught that barriers signify control. A fence keeps danger out. A wall keeps safety in. The rail, polished and continuous, suggests that someone has thought carefully about protection. It does not invite questions. Yet the deck teaches the wrong lesson. It trains the body to linger where speed might one day be required. It encourages stillness where motion could matter. It frames the sea as something to admire rather than monitor. Its very openness distracts from the fact that escape routes are limited, movement constrained, options few. But none of this is visible in the moment. The deck's purpose is fulfilled simply by existing. It reassures through design, through atmosphere, through the shared confidence of those who occupy it. A woman standing here feels exposed to fresh air, not to risk. She feels elevated, not vulnerable. Even at night, the deck retains its charm. Lamps cast gentle pools of light, shadows soften edges. The water glides past unseen, audible only as a muted presence. The darkness beyond the rail feels distant, unreal, kept at bay by illumination and routine. The deck remains a place of display, Dress is chosen with it in mind. Appearances are curated for its audience. It becomes an extension of the drawing room, relocated briefly outdoors. The sea is tolerated as long as it behaves. No one discusses how quickly this space could change. No one considers how the same openness that invites leisure might complicate urgency. The deck is not imagined as a place of instruction or assembly. It is imagined as respite. And so women continue to walk its length, arms linked, faces composed, trusting that the space exists for their pleasure rather than as part of a larger system that does not pause for aesthetics. The ship glides forward, its decks fulfilling their role perfectly, projecting serenity, encouraging confidence, disguising vulnerability beneath polish and proportion. They are decks meant to be admired, not questioned. And in that purpose, they succeed completely until admiration is no longer enough, and the sea insists on being more than a view. Time, aboard the ship, behaves with unusual confidence. It announces itself in bells and courses, in printed cards slipped discreetly beneath cabin doors, in the dependable arrival of meals and the precise dimming of lights. Hours pass not as uncertainty but as assurance. Morning follows night because it has been promised to do so. Arrival follows departure because it always has. The schedule is not merely informative, it is persuasive. Passengers consult it the way one consults a clock on land, with the unspoken belief that time is stable, obedient, and ultimately benevolent. The ship does not feel subject to chance so long as it remains subject to order. Each hour accounted for becomes an argument against interruption. Women feel this deeply. Their lives have long been structured by timetables that reward compliance. Lessons, visits, seasons, engagements. Each arrives when expected, departs when finished. To live well is to keep pace. To fall out of rhythm is to invite disorder. The ship's schedule mirrors this upbringing perfectly. Breakfast at the same hour. Luncheon without delay. Dinner announced, not requested. The predictability is soothing. It suggests a system that knows what it is doing, a vessel moving through space as deliberately as a calendar page turning. When time behaves, danger feels unlikely. Disasters, after all, disrupt schedules. They announce themselves through delay. So long as bells ring on cue, nothing can be wrong. This belief hardens quickly. A woman who wakes in the night listens for familiar sounds, the distant hum, the muffled footsteps, the steady rhythm of motion. When morning arrives as scheduled, it confirms the illusion of control. The ship did not falter while she slept. Therefore, it must not be capable of faltering at all. Even small delays are smoothed away. If luncheon arrives moments late, it is explained politely. If weather alters the promenade, the change is framed as temporary, inconsequential. The schedule absorbs these irregularities without breaking. It flexes just enough to preserve authority. Authority, here, is everything. The printed program reassures, not because it predicts reality, but because it suggests mastery over it. Someone, somewhere, has planned this crossing carefully enough to assign hours to leisure. That someone is assumed to have planned for everything else as well. Women trust this assumption instinctively. They have been taught that order equals safety, that predictability signals competence. A well-run household is a safe household. A well-run voyage must be the same. The schedule becomes evidence of stewardship, and stewardship implies guardianship. Why worry when time itself appears managed? This confidence extends to the sea. Days are divided cleanly, miles covered, progress charted, distance reduced to arithmetic. The ocean is transformed into a timeline rather than a threat. One moves through it the way one moves through an afternoon. The schedule leaves no room for interruption. There is no space on the program for confusion, no hour reserved for uncertainty. Emergencies are not acknowledged because acknowledgement would imply their possibility. The absence of contingency is interpreted as proof of reliability. Women absorb this quietly. They plan outfits around dinners. They anticipate conversations. They measure the crossing not in risk, but in days remaining. Time becomes a companion rather than a variable. This companionship is deceptive. Schedules do not control reality. They merely describe intention. They assume cooperation from the world beyond the page. When cooperation ends, the schedule offers no guidance, only the shock of its own irrelevance. But aboard the ship, that truth feels distant. As long as bells ring, as long as stewards announce the next event, as long as the clock continues its unbroken march, the future feels guaranteed. The schedule becomes a shield against imagination, crowding out the possibility of disruption with certainty. Women lean on this certainty. They trust the passage of hours more than their own senses. They accept time as evidence. If danger existed, surely it would alter the program. Surely it would announce itself in delay, in cancellation, in deviation. The ship continues on time. And with every punctual meal, every orderly evening, the belief strengthens that nothing capable of breaking the schedule could ever reach them at all. Time moves forward, exact and obedient. The schedule holds. And because it does, so does the illusion that the world will continue to do exactly as it has been told. There are places aboard the ship where confidence does not linger. They exist below the line of conversation, beneath the carpets and lamplight, where heat replaces polish and noise replaces reassurance. These spaces are not meant to be visited by passengers. They are not designed to inspire trust through beauty. They exist to work. And because they work unseen, they are rarely imagined at all. Above, women speak of the crossing as smooth. Below, the engines labor without ceremony. Pistons rise and fall in relentless repetition. Metal sweats. Valves hiss. Coal dust coats skin and lungs alike. The ship's forward motion is paid for here, minute by minute, through exertion that never pauses. This effort is invisible by design. The ship's elegance depends on concealment. Comfort requires distance from mechanism. The illusion of effortlessness is maintained only if the source of effort remains unobserved. Passengers are not encouraged to wonder how motion occurs, only to enjoy its result. So they do not ask. They do not ask how many men it takes to keep the engines fed, how heat is managed, how strain is monitored, how failure would present itself. These questions belong to a different class of people, a different vocabulary entirely. To ask them would be to acknowledge that systems require vigilance. Vigilance disrupts comfort. Women aboard the ship are not ignorant, they are insulated. Their education has taught them outcomes, not processes. They know trains arrive. They know lights turn on. They know ships cross oceans. The mechanisms behind these facts are assumed to be stable, overseen by experts whose work need not be scrutinized. The engine room becomes an abstraction. It exists somewhere below, doing what it must, governed by rules and men trained to follow them. It is not considered relevant to the experience of travel. Like the sea itself, it has been relegated to background, yet it is the ship's heart. Every vibration felt above deck originates here. Every mile traveled is earned through combustion and pressure. The calm that passengers experience is built on sustained, invisible stress. The engines do not rest. They cannot afford to. Those who work there know this intimately. They read the ship through sound and heat, through rhythm and resistance. They notice when the pulse changes, when effort increases, when something feels slightly off. Their awareness is constant, sharpened by necessity, but their knowledge does not travel upward. The hierarchy of the ship prevents it. Information moves through channels designed to preserve calm, not to communicate strain. A concern becomes a report becomes a discussion waits for confirmation. By the time anything reaches the surface, it has been softened, translated into acceptable language. Passengers never hear the raw truth. They are spared the details, the heat, the urgency, the relentless demand placed on machinery to maintain the illusion of ease. They are protected from the knowledge that the ship's composure is the result of continuous negotiation with physics. This protection feels like care. It allows women to sleep soundly, to stroll decks, to trust the steadiness beneath their feet. It preserves the narrative that modern systems operate smoothly by default. But default is not permanence. Machines fail differently than people expect. They do not announce their exhaustion politely. They do not wait for permission. When limits are reached, failure is often sudden, not gradual. No one aboard is taught to imagine this. The engine room remains unvisited, unconsidered, unnamed in conversation. It exists only as a concept, stripped of its realities. The ship moves, therefore, it must be functioning correctly. That is the extent of inquiry. Women pass over it in thought, as they pass over it physically without pause. They feel only the result, not the cause, and because the result is comfort, they assume the cause is secure. The tragedy of this assumption is its sincerity. They trust not out of negligence, but because the world has trained them to trust systems that appear stable. They have never been required to understand what stability costs. Below them, the engines continue their work, unseen and uncelebrated, pushing the ship forward with a persistence that no one above needs to acknowledge. The women sleep, talk, plan, and believe, never asking what keeps them moving, never wondering how thin the margin might be between progress and pause. And the engine room, unasked about, unimagined, continues to burn, carrying them steadily onward, until the moment when unseen labor is no longer enough to maintain the illusion built above it. When danger arrives without ceremony, it finds no vocabulary waiting for it. The women aboard have words for discomfort, for fatigue, for inconvenience. They know how to speak of nerves, of weather, of delays politely explained. But they have never been taught how to name the moment when routine fractures without announcement. There is no practiced phrase for that sensation, the one that begins in the chest and travels outward, searching for confirmation. The ship has not given them language for urgency. There are no drills to rehearse the words, no instructions repeated often enough to settle into memory, no shared script that explains what to do when certainty evaporates. The absence of language is itself a form of discipline. It teaches that such moments are not meant to occur. So when something changes subtly at first, it registers only as confusion. A vibration feels wrong, but wrong compared to what? A sound carries differently through the walls, but how should it sound? The ship has never taught them the difference between ordinary and dangerous. Everything unfamiliar has been smoothed into normality since the moment they boarded. Women glance at one another, searching for cues. Someone must say something, someone with authority, someone whose voice can translate sensation into instruction, but no one does. Officers move calmly. Stewards continue their duties. The atmosphere does not shift visibly. Without external confirmation, internal alarm feels unjustified. This hesitation is learned. They have been trained to wait for explanation before reaction, to seek permission before movement, to trust that if action were necessary, it would be announced clearly and politely. The ship has reinforced this trust with silence. But silence is not clarity. Without language, fear remains amorphous. It cannot be communicated, only endured. A woman senses that something is wrong, but she cannot articulate it without sounding unreasonable. And sounding unreasonable carries social risk more immediate than abstract danger. So she swallows the feeling. She returns to her seat. She resumes her posture. She tells herself that if anything were truly amiss, someone would be explaining it already. This reasoning has worked before. It restores order inside her, even as uncertainty lingers. The ship continues to move. Announcements, if they come, are vague. Reassurances are offered without detail. Words are chosen to preserve calm rather than convey information. Everything is under control. There is no cause for alarm. These phrases do not instruct, they pacify. Women receive them gratefully. They are relieved to be told how to feel. Calm is easier than interpretation. Obedience feels safer than decision. Without a clear language of emergency, reassurance becomes the only available guide. The problem is not ignorance. It is that knowledge has been withheld under the assumption that it would never be needed. The women have been protected from imagining failure, and in doing so, deprived of the tools to respond when imagination becomes necessary. Language shapes action. Without words for urgency, urgency feels improper. Without instructions, movement feels premature. The absence of explicit danger becomes evidence against it. The ship's composure becomes the dominant narrative. Even as awareness grows, a woman notices that stewards are speaking more quietly, that doors are closing more firmly, that certain areas are no longer accessible. These changes register, but without explanation, they remain fragments. Fragmented information does not compel action, it confuses it. Confusion breeds passivity. People wait for clarity rather than respond to sensation. They trust that language will arrive in time, carrying meaning and direction. They believe that systems designed to manage risk will also manage communication. But communication, like preparedness, has been deferred. The ship was built to move efficiently, not to teach passengers how to react when efficiency falters. The women aboard have been given comfort instead of comprehension, reassurance instead of rehearsal. So when the moment comes when routine no longer aligns with reality, they find themselves suspended between feeling and action, unable to bridge the gap. They know something is wrong. They do not know what to call it. They do not know what to do. And in that silence, where language should have been, time slips away quietly, politely, without waiting for the right words to arrive. The lifeboats are present, and therefore assumed sufficient. They sit along the deck like punctuation marks, curved, orderly, evenly spaced objects that signal responsibility rather than action. Their very visibility is meant to reassure. "Look," they say, "we have thought of this. You are protected." But no one is taught to touch them. They are encountered daily and never considered. Women pass beneath them while strolling, their shadows crossing polished wood, their forms absorbed into the background of leisure. The boats do not invite inspection. They do not invite questions. They exist as symbols, not tools. Symbolism is powerful. It replaces understanding with appearance. The presence of lifeboats suggests preparedness without requiring engagement. They reassure by implication alone. If something exists, surely it exists for a reason. And if it exists, surely someone knows how to use it. That someone is not the passenger. Women are never encouraged to ask how the boats are launched, how many they hold, how quickly they can be accessed, or whether they could enter one without assistance. These questions feel inappropriate, technical, unbecoming, faintly distrustful. Distrust disrupts the illusion. The lifeboats are arranged to be seen, not handled. Ropes are neatly coiled, covers secured, everything looks orderly, untouched. They are part of the ship's aesthetic, their presence folded into the visual language of safety rather than the practical language of survival. A woman standing near one does not imagine herself inside it. Her clothing alone discourages the thought. Heavy skirts, fitted bodices, gloves that limit grip. The lifeboat does not resemble any environment she has been prepared to enter. It belongs to sailors, to emergencies she has never been asked to envision. And so the lifeboat becomes abstract. It exists somewhere between decoration and promise, admired but not understood. Its function is acknowledged only insofar as it contributes to reassurance. It proves that the ship is responsible, modern, compliant with expectations. That is enough. The crew reinforces this distance. They do not invite questions. They do not demonstrate procedures. The boats are maintained quietly, without drawing attention. To emphasize them would be to acknowledge the possibility of need, and need is impolite to imagine. Women internalize this. They have been taught that safety measures, like servants and systems, work best when invisible. One does not interfere, one does not inquire, one trusts that arrangements have been made correctly. The lifeboats, then, are trusted precisely because they are unfamiliar. Familiarity would require engagement. Engagement would require understanding. Understanding might introduce doubt. So the boats remain untouched, unexamined, preserved in their symbolic role. Even in conversation, they are rarely mentioned. If they are referenced at all, it is with a kind of casual assurance. Of course there are lifeboats. The statement ends there. No further detail is needed. The implication is complete. This belief is reinforced by precedent. No one aboard has ever needed to use a lifeboat before, or if someone has, it is not spoken of. The absence of stories becomes proof that the objects are sufficient. They have never failed because they have never been tested, at least not in memory. But objects do not become functional through presence alone. They require familiarity, access, practice. Without these, they remain inert, beautiful, reassuring, and useless when speed and clarity are required. The women do not know this. They see the lifeboats as part of the ship's promise, not as part of their own responsibility. They trust that if the moment ever comes, someone will guide them, lift them, place them where they need to be. They do not imagine a moment when guidance might be delayed, incomplete, or absent. So the lifeboats remain where they are, suspended above the deck, untouched, immaculate. They fulfill their role perfectly so long as they are never needed. And as the ship continues forward, the women pass beneath them again and again, reassured by their presence, unaware that reassurance without readiness is only decoration. When the sea demands action, it will not care how orderly the boats appear. It will care only whether they can be reached, entered, and used by people who were never taught to do any of those things at all. Confidence, once established, does not remain still. It travels, it spreads, it migrates from drawing rooms to railway platforms, from platforms to docks, from docks to the open sea. It is packed carefully alongside trunks and letters, carried across borders with the same ease as wealth itself. By the time these women step aboard, confidence has already crossed oceans before them. It arrives pre-approved. This confidence has been inherited, passed down through conversation, example, and unchallenged success. Others have crossed before and returned. Stories circulate of pleasant passages, of boredom rather than danger, of seas so calm they hardly registered. These accounts accumulate until the crossing becomes unremarkable. The ocean, once feared, is reduced to precedent. A woman listens to these stories and absorbs them quietly. She is not reckless, she is reassured. Each successful crossing becomes evidence. Each uneventful voyage reinforces the belief that the sea, like society, has learned its place. Confidence hardens into expectation. By the time she boards, the crossing feels less like a risk than a formality, something to be endured politely, perhaps even enjoyed, but never truly questioned. The danger once associated with travel has been diluted by repetition. Familiarity has replaced respect. This confidence is collective. It does not belong to one woman alone, but to the class she represents. It is shared in glances exchanged on deck, in laughter that carries easily over the sound of water, in the absence of concern that binds strangers together. When everyone appears assured, assurance becomes contagious. Doubt, by contrast, feels antisocial. A woman who questions the crossing risks disrupting the shared confidence that sustains order. Her uncertainty would stand out against the calm like a raised voice in a quiet room. So even private hesitation is managed discreetly, kept from spreading. The ship thrives on this dynamic. Confidence makes passengers predictable. Predictable passengers are easy to manage. When people believe in the system, they comply with it. They wait when told to wait. They move when instructed to move. Their trust smooths the operation of the entire vessel. Confidence becomes infrastructure. It supports routines, reinforces authority, and reduces resistance. The ship does not need to persuade. Belief has already done the work. Women board ready to cooperate, prepared to trust, inclined to assume competence. This confidence does not arise from ignorance. It arises from consistency, from a world that has rewarded belief more often than skepticism, from institutions that have functioned well enough to deserve loyalty, at least on the surface. To distrust them now would require a reason stronger than habit. No such reason has been offered. The sea appears compliant. The ship performs flawlessly. The schedule holds. Nothing challenges the narrative of control. Confidence continues its quiet journey, moving deeper into the crossing with every uneventful hour. Even when signs appear, small deviations, subtle irregularities, they are absorbed by confidence rather than questioned. The belief that everything is fundamentally sound reframes anomalies as temporary, inconsequential, easily resolved. Confidence smooths perception. It filters experience, allowing only what aligns with expectation to register fully. Anything that contradicts it is minimized, postponed, or dismissed. This filtering feels rational. It preserves calm. It maintains order, but it also blinds. The women do not see confidence as something they carry. They experience it as something proven. It feels external, justified, reinforced by the ship itself. To doubt it would be to doubt reality as it has been presented. So, confidence continues onward, crossing not just oceans but thresholds of awareness. It moves past caution. It bypasses preparation. It settles into certainty. By the time the sea begins to demand acknowledgement, confidence has already done its work quietly, persuading everyone aboard that they are safe because they have always been safe before. The ocean does not challenge this belief immediately. It waits. Confidence, after all, travels faster than truth, but truth has a way of arriving eventually, indifferent to how far belief has already gone. Night alters the ship without announcing the change. The lamps glow more softly, voices lower, corridors empty until footsteps echo longer than they should. Above deck, the horizon dissolves entirely, leaving only darkness pressed against steel. The sea, unseen, feels closer not because it has moved, but because the world has narrowed. Most passengers do not notice. They have retired to cabins designed to forget the outside. Curtains drawn, doors closed. Sleep settles over them in layers, aided by exhaustion and the steady murmur of engines. Night becomes something to pass through, not to attend. But the ship does not sleep. Somewhere above and below, men remain awake, not many, but enough. Night watches take their positions quietly, trained to observe without disturbing. Their role is not dramatic, it is procedural. They scan instruments, pace decks, listen for deviations that might matter, yet even vigilance has limits. The night watch is structured around expectation. It looks for known dangers, weather shifts, traffic, routine irregularities. It does not search for the unimaginable. It cannot. No watch can prepare for what has never been fully admitted as possible. The sea at night is deceptive. Its surface may appear calm, its movement steady, its sound muted against the hull. Darkness conceals distance and speed alike. What is far away feels irrelevant. What is near arrives without warning. Vision is reduced. Judgment depends on instruments and assumption. Assumption, at night, becomes heavier. Officers trust charts. Crew trust routine. The The ship has passed safely through nights like this before, many of them. Each uneventful watch reinforces the belief that tonight will be the same. The mind relaxes its grip just enough to allow fatigue to enter. Fatigue is the quiet enemy. It dulls attention without announcing itself. It encourages shortcuts, glances instead of checks, familiarity instead of scrutiny. In the dark, repetition feels like proof. Nothing has happened yet. Therefore, nothing will. Below deck, the engines continue their labor, unchanged by night. They push forward through darkness without awareness, guided only by human instruction and mechanical tolerance. The ship moves because it has been told to move, not because anyone is watching the water ahead with perfect clarity. Passengers, unaware, surrender completely. They sleep through minor shifts, through distant sounds, through changes that might register as unusual if noticed at all. Their trust in the ship deepens in unconsciousness. Night passes, and with it, the opportunity to observe what daylight might reveal. This is not negligence. It is design. Ships are built to allow passengers to forget where they are. Night amplifies this effect. The less one sees, the more one relies on assumption. And assumption, nurtured by comfort and precedent, feels reliable. Yet the night holds risks daylight does not. Cold sharpens. Visibility narrows. Reaction time lengthens. When something appears suddenly, there is less margin to respond. Systems that function adequately under scrutiny may falter under reduced awareness. The women aboard do not know this. They have never been invited to consider the difference between day and night at sea. Night, to them, is rest, privacy, silence. It is not a condition requiring heightened awareness. That responsibility belongs elsewhere, to officers, to watches, to the ship itself. So they sleep, and the ship moves forward into darkness governed by routines that assume visibility, judgment, and time will always be available. The watch continues its circuit, the sea continues its movement. Between them lies a gap not of distance, but of perception. The women trust that unseen risks are being seen by someone else. The watch trusts that nothing outside the expected will appear. The ship trusts its own momentum. Night passes quietly, as it always has before. And in that quiet, unseen risks draw closer, not with malice or intent, but with the simple indifference of a world that does not pause because people are resting. At some point, without ceremony, the sea loses its voice. It is no longer spoken of as a force with intention or temperament. It is reframed instead as a surface, something to be crossed, measured, and eventually forgotten. Language strips it of agency. Charts flatten it. Timetables tame it. What was once alive in story and memory becomes inert in explanation. The women aboard inherit this reframing effortlessly. They have never been taught to negotiate with the sea, only to pass over it. In their world, danger is active only when it announces itself. Silence implies submission. Stillness suggests compliance. The sea, calm and dark, appears to accept its role as background. This perception is comforting. A passive sea asks nothing of those above it. It does not demand vigilance or humility. It does not interrupt conversation or sleep. It allows itself to be ignored, treated as scenery rather than participant. The ship glides forward, and the water parts obediently, reinforcing the illusion. Progress depends on this illusion. To imagine the sea as active would complicate confidence. It would reintroduce uncertainty, the possibility that nature has not agreed to modern terms. So the sea is redefined instead as neutral, manageable, fundamentally cooperative. This definition is repeated often enough to feel true. Engineers speak of resistance, not opposition. Officers refer to conditions, not moods. Passengers discuss the water the way one discusses weather on land, an external factor, noteworthy only when inconvenient. The language drains the sea of character. Without character, There is no reason to listen. Women stand at the rail and look out without expectation. The water moves, but movement alone does not signify intent. Waves are interpreted as patterns, not messages. Depth is irrelevant so long as the surface behaves. The sea becomes passive by consensus. No one aboard remembers when it was otherwise. Stories of wrecks and storms belong to the past, framed as lessons already learned. The modern vessel, after all, was built to correct history. The sea's role is now secondary. This belief shapes behavior subtly but completely. No one scans the horizon with concern. No one considers what lies beneath the surface. Attention is directed inward to schedules, to meals, to conversation. The world beyond the hull is allowed to exist only insofar as it does not intrude. Yet passivity is a projection. The sea has not agreed to this role. It has not changed. It has simply been misunderstood. Its silence is not acquiescence, and its stillness is not obedience. These qualities have always existed alongside its capacity for sudden violence. But that capacity requires imagination to perceive, and imagination has been deliberately discouraged. The age prefers certainty to wonder, control to reverence. The sea, once mythic, has been reduced to material. The women aboard feel no contradiction. They trust what they have been shown: a smooth surface, a steady ship, a crossing that proceeds without incident. The sea has done nothing to contradict its assigned passivity yet. This waiting is not patience. It is indifference. The sea does not react to belief or disbelief. It does not care how it has been described or diminished. It remains vast, layered, and unpredictable beneath the surface calm. But aboard the ship, the illusion holds. The women continue their routines, confident that the sea will remain what it appears to be: quiet, compliant, content to let steel pass over it without resistance. They have been taught that danger announces itself loudly, that threats are visible, that systems exist to manage whatever lies beyond human control. They have not been taught that the most dangerous moments often arrive without spectacle, carried in silence beneath assumptions that feel safe until they are not. For now, the sea accepts its mischaracterization. It allows itself to be treated as passive, as background, as solved. It carries the ship without protest, without warning, without interruption. And in doing so, it prepares the conditions for the moment when passivity will no longer be possible, and the illusion, carefully built and carefully believed, will finally be forced to confront the reality it has spent so long refusing to imagine. Silence, on this ship, has been carefully cultivated. It settles into corridors after dinner, softens conversations, smooths the edges of thought. Doors close without echo. Footsteps fade into carpet. Even the sea seems to withdraw its voice, reduced to a distant, rhythmic presence that blends easily into the background of sleep. Silence is presented not as absence, but as proof evidence that everything is functioning as intended. Women learn to trust it. In their lives on land, silence has often meant resolution, arguments concluded, illness soothed, problems managed discreetly behind closed doors. Loudness, by contrast, belongs to disruption, to streets, to factories, to those without the means to buffer their lives from noise. Quiet is a privilege, and privilege feels safe. The ship understands this instinctively. It dampens sound wherever possible. Machinery is insulated, announcements are measured and infrequent. Alarms, though they exist, are kept out of sight and mind. The prevailing message is clear: you are not meant to hear distress here. When nothing is said, women assume there is nothing to know. Silence becomes confirmation. If danger existed, surely it would announce itself. Surely there would be shouting, bells, urgency carried openly through the decks. The absence of such signals is interpreted as reassurance rather than omission. This interpretation is reinforced by authority. Officers move quietly, purposefully, without haste. Stewards continue their routines with composed efficiency. Nothing about their demeanor suggests alarm. The ship's hierarchy performs calm flawlessly, and that performance fills the silence with meaning. Women read it attentively. They have been trained to interpret social cues, to understand what is not spoken as carefully as what is. In drawing rooms and salons, silence often carries the most information. Here, too, it is read as intention rather than gap. The ship feels settled. Night passes without interruption. Morning arrives as scheduled. Meals proceed. Conversation resumes. The silence between these events feels earned, a reward for order maintained. It suggests that nothing has demanded attention while no one was listening. Even unease dissolves in quiet. A woman who wakes briefly in the night, sensing something she cannot name, listens. The ship hums. The water laps. No voices carry urgency through the walls. Silence answers her question before it is fully formed. She turns over and sleeps again. This trust is not naive. It is conditioned. These women have learned that systems speak when they need to, that professionals announce problems, that authority does not remain silent in the face of danger. Silence, therefore, must mean stability. Yet silence can also mean delay. It can mean information withheld until it is orderly enough to be delivered. It can mean uncertainty traveling slowly through layers of permission. It can mean that those who know are deciding how much to say and when. But none of this is visible from the passenger decks. Here, silence feels complete. It fills the space where fear might otherwise grow. It smooths over questions before they are asked. It invites rest, compliance, acceptance. Silence becomes a shield. It protects women from imagining what might be unfolding beyond their hearing. It spares them from the discomfort of partial knowledge. It allows them to remain within the emotional architecture the ship has built, calm, orderly, restrained. This architecture is elegant and effective. By the time silence might become suspicious, it has already done its work. It has lulled, reassured, and disciplined response. It has trained everyone aboard to associate quiet with control. When noise finally comes, if it comes at all, it will arrive into a space unprepared to receive it. But for now, the ship continues forward, wrapped in hush. The sea keeps its distance. The engines maintain their rhythm. Nothing interrupts the quiet narrative of safety. Silence holds. And because it holds, it is mistaken for strength rather than the fragile pause it truly is, waiting to be broken by a reality that does not require sound in order to exist. The ship does not ask where it is going. It has been given a heading, a speed, a schedule, and it obeys them with unwavering fidelity. Its great mass presses forward through water without hesitation, driven by engines that do not consider alternatives. Forward motion is assumed to be correct simply because it has already begun. This assumption governs everything aboard. Passengers feel it beneath their feet, the steady, unbroken advance that suggests purpose and certainty. Movement itself becomes reassurance. So long as the ship continues, nothing can be wrong. Stopping would be alarming. Turning would invite questions. Forward, therefore, feels safest. Women absorb this logic intuitively. They have lived within systems that prize momentum. Progress is equated with virtue. To pause is to fall behind. To reconsider is to appear weak or indecisive. Once a course has been set by fathers, by schedules, by institutions, it is expected to be followed. The ship embodies this expectation perfectly. There is no discussion of alternatives, no visible consideration of slowing or adjusting. The engines push on, hour after hour, consuming coal and certainty alike. Each mile traveled becomes proof that the previous mile was correct. This is the tyranny of momentum. The longer the ship moves forward without incident, the harder it becomes to imagine changing course. Every uneventful hour reinforces the belief that nothing ahead requires alteration. To question the trajectory now would feel disruptive, almost irrational. Passengers do not see navigation. They do not watch decisions being made. They are shielded from deliberation, from doubt, from the quiet moments when judgment might be required. What they experience instead is outcome motion uninterrupted, direction unchanged. This experience teaches a dangerous lesson. It suggests that progress is self-validating, that systems which move confidently must know where they are going, that the absence of interruption is evidence of correctness. Women, raised to trust authority and continuity, accept this readily. They do not ask whether conditions have changed. They do not wonder if speed remains appropriate. They assume that someone else is asking these questions and that answers have already been given. Their role is to continue to dine, to sleep, to wait. The ship's forward motion becomes a kind of spell. It quiets unease. It reassures the mind that nothing unexpected lies ahead. If danger existed, surely it would have required a pause by now. Surely the ship would have signaled the need to slow, to adjust, to reconsider. But machines do not reconsider. They follow instructions until those instructions become impossible to fulfill. The engines do not question the water ahead. They do not sense risk. They convert fuel into motion faithfully, relentlessly, without awareness of consequence. The women aboard mistake this fidelity for wisdom. They feel carried by something larger than themselves, something decisive, confident, unstoppable. The ship's movement becomes synonymous with safety, not because it guarantees it, but because it feels purposeful. Purpose is comforting. It replaces vigilance with trust. It suggests that someone is in control, that a destination awaits, that the journey is unfolding as intended. Even when the sea darkens or the air sharpens, the forward motion persists, smoothing over any reason to object. No one aboard suggests slowing. To do so would contradict everything they have been taught about progress and propriety. It would imply fear, uncertainty, lack of faith in the systems guiding them. Better to continue and trust that correction, if needed, will come from above. The ship presses on. Each passing minute commits it further to its course. Each mile traveled narrows the possibility of reversal. Momentum becomes not just movement, but decision made repeatedly, silently, without consultation. By the time questioning might feel appropriate, it feels too late. The women sense none of this consciously. They experience only continuity, the gentle insistence that forward is correct because forward is happening. The ship does not waver, neither do their beliefs, and so the vessel continues into open water, guided by charts, confidence, and habit, carrying with it a faith in motion itself, a faith that assumes the future will always yield to momentum, a faith that has not yet learned the difference between moving forward and moving wisely. Not every loss announces itself to history. Some ships disappear quietly, slipping beneath the surface without spectacle, without names that linger, without stories retold often enough to harden into warning. Their absence is registered briefly in ledgers, in insurance notices, in the muted grief of families who learn to lower their voices when speaking of what never returned. These are the ships no one remembers. They did not sink in dramatic fashion. They did not carry symbols powerful enough to demand myth. They were working vessels, transitional vessels, ships that belonged to an in-between moment, modern enough to trust, not famous enough to mourn publicly. When they failed, their failures were absorbed rather than examined. The women aboard other ships rarely heard of them. If they did, the stories were softened quickly. An accident, perhaps, weather, an unfortunate deviation. The narrative ended there, tidy and distant. No lessons were drawn. No systems interrogated. The disappearance was framed as exception, not pattern. This framing was deliberate. Shipping companies understood reputation. Newspapers understood restraint. Families understood discretion. To speak too plainly about loss was to invite doubt into an age that depended on confidence. Better to allow vanished ships to dissolve into anonymity, their stories incomplete, their lessons unlearned. Records exist, of course. Dates, tonnage, routes interrupted. These details sit quietly in archives, stripped of human texture. They do not capture the hours before disappearance, the decisions made without witness, the confidence that preceded silence. They cannot convey how ordinary those journeys felt until they were not. For women traveling afterward, this absence is reassuring rather than alarming. They look for cautionary tales and find none widely repeated. They assume this means safety has been proven. The logic is flawed, but persuasive. If disaster were common, it would be spoken of. If it were relevant, it would be remembered. Silence becomes evidence. The ship they are on feels new, improved, corrected. It belongs to a later chapter, one that has supposedly learned from earlier mistakes. The vanished vessels are treated as relics of a less refined time, their losses attributed to deficiencies already resolved. No one asks what, exactly, was resolved. The assumption persists that progress moves cleanly forward, that each iteration replaces error with certainty. This belief allows memory to be selective. It preserves optimism by discarding inconvenient histories. Women participate in this forgetting without intention. They do not seek out records of maritime loss. Such research would feel morbid, unnecessary, even impolite. They trust that if something were worth knowing, it would be provided. That information, like protection, flows downward from authority, and authority has chosen silence. So the ships that vanished remain unexamined, their stories unfinished. They exist only as gaps, moments when forward motion ended without ceremony. Their absence is not integrated into collective understanding. It is treated as noise rather than signal. This absence shapes confidence profoundly. It allows belief to remain intact. It shields travelers from the discomfort of precedent. It suggests that modern vessels operate in a realm untouched by earlier failures, as though time itself confers immunity. But the sea does not differentiate between remembered and forgotten. It does not reserve its indifference for famous hulls alone. It does not wait for legend to grant permission. It has taken ships quietly before, and it will do so again regardless of whether anyone bothers to name them afterward. The women aboard their polished decks are unaware of this lineage of disappearance. They do not know how many crossings ended without narrative, how many journeys concluded in silence rather than spectacle. They have not been taught to recognize absence as warning. History, selectively curated, has spared them that burden. So they continue onward, buoyed by confidence built on incomplete memory, trusting a present that feels secure because the past has been edited for comfort. Behind them lie the ships that vanished without legend. Ahead of them lies open water, patient, unrecorded, and unconcerned with whether the next loss will be remembered at all. Their absence is noted first in the smallest ways. A chair left unclaimed at a familiar table, letters unanswered beyond what courtesy allows, a name no longer spoken aloud, then spoken only once, then not at all. There is no public accounting, no shared moment of recognition. Loss enters quietly, as these women did, without spectacle, without permission to disrupt the order they once upheld. Families adjust with discipline. Mothers fold grief into routine. Fathers redirect conversation. Estates are settled with efficiency that borders on reverence. Portraits remain on walls, but they become historical rather than present objects, to be acknowledged politely and passed without comment. The house absorbs the absence and continues. This restraint is praised. To mourn loudly would invite attention. To demand explanation would suggest instability. The women who did not return are remembered privately, their stories compressed into phrases safe enough to repeat. She was traveling. There was an accident. It was unavoidable. These words close the matter without opening it. No one asks what they felt. No one records their last hours, their last assumptions, their last acts of trust. Their experience does not become evidence. It does not inform policy or alter design. It is treated as personal tragedy rather than structural failure. This separation is deliberate. Public grief would threaten confidence. It would suggest that the world does not always protect those who comply with it. Better to contain sorrow within family walls, where it can be managed, moderated, and eventually quieted. The women become symbols rather than subjects. They are remembered as daughters, wives, heiresses roles rather than individuals. Their disappearance is absorbed into lineage rather than interrogated as consequence. The crossing remains blameless. The ship remains exemplary. The sea remains incidental. Their stories do not circulate widely. Newspapers avoid detail. Shipping notices reduce lives to numbers. Conversation skirts the topic entirely, as though speaking too clearly might summon doubt. The women who did not return become exceptions, unfortunate, but irrelevant to the broader narrative of progress. This erasure is subtle but effective. Without stories, there are no warnings. Without warnings, there is no urgency to change. The absence of women becomes a private sorrow rather than a public reckoning. Their compliance is rewarded, even in death with silence. Other women take note. They sense the boundaries of acceptable grief. They learn that loss, like fear, must be managed politely. That asking too much of the world after tragedy is frowned upon. That endurance, even when fatal, is considered a virtue. This lesson shapes future crossings. Women board ships carrying not only confidence, but the knowledge that if they do not return, their absence will be handled with decorum, that the world will continue, that no disruption will follow their disappearance beyond a respectful pause. This is not cruelty. It is structure. A system designed to preserve momentum cannot linger on loss without threatening itself, so it absorbs the women who did not return and moves forward unchanged. Their names fade quickly. They do not become cautionary tales. They do not alter schedules or procedures. Their trust is not examined, only assumed. The lesson drawn from their absence is not that something failed, but that misfortune occurs occasionally, without meaning. This framing protects belief. It allows progress to continue unchallenged. It reassures future passengers that nothing essential has been compromised. The world remains reliable. The sea remains manageable. The ships remain safe. And so the women who did not return remain precisely that, absent. Absent from reform. Absent from memory. Absent from the conversations that might have altered what came next. Their silence becomes part of the system that failed them, folded neatly into the background of confidence that persists long after their lives have ended. History moves on without them, and because it does, it prepares the conditions for the next crossing to feel just as certain, just as safe, and just as unexamined as the last. Grief, in respectable houses, is not permitted a full voice. It is lowered, softened, redirected into corners where it cannot disturb the arrangement of daily life. Curtains are drawn a little earlier. Conversations pause and resume without explanation. Names are spoken carefully, if at all, and always indoors, where sound can be controlled. Families learn this discipline quickly. When a daughter does not return, there is an initial flurry of activity, letters written, inquiries made, condolences received. Then comes the narrowing. Visitors are received less often. Questions are answered briefly. Details are avoided. What cannot be resolved is contained. Whispers replace statements. A mother speaks to her sister in the hallway rather than the parlor. A father lowers his voice even when alone, as though the walls themselves might repeat what is said too plainly. Servants are instructed gently but firmly not to speculate. The household adopts a new rhythm, one shaped around a mission. This restraint is presented as dignity. To speak openly would risk inviting scrutiny, and scrutiny threatens stability. Respectable families do not invite the public into their grief. They manage it privately, preserving appearances while absorbing loss internally. This ability to endure without spectacle is admired. But admiration has a cost. Silence prevents connection. Each family believes its grief is singular, unfortunate, isolated. Without shared language, there is no collective understanding. Loss remains personal rather than systemic. The sea is rarely mentioned. If it is spoken of abstractly, as circumstance rather than cause. The ship is referred to by name only once, then replaced by phrases that distance responsibility. The crossing, the voyage, that journey. Language is used to blur rather than clarify. Children notice this instinctively. They learn which questions are unwelcome. They understand that curiosity about the disappearance is impolite. They absorb the lesson that some truths destabilize order and must therefore be handled with care or not at all. This lesson travels forward. Daughters raised in whispering households grow into women who know how to manage fear quietly. They learn that asking too much of the world after tragedy is frowned upon, that the proper response to loss is composure. That silence is a form of respect. So when they travel themselves, they carry this inheritance. They board ships with the understanding that if something goes wrong, it will be handled discreetly, that families will adjust, that the world will not stop. This knowledge does not frighten them, it reassures them. It suggests continuity, even in the face of disappearance. The whisper becomes a social contract. Families agree not to disturb the narrative of progress. Shipping companies agree not to provide too much detail. Society agrees not to ask questions that might implicate systems it depends upon. Everyone participates. Newspapers report facts stripped of emotion. Names appear briefly, then vanish from print. The public is spared the discomfort of understanding how ordinary these losses are. The absence of noise becomes proof that nothing essential has gone wrong. Yet whispers carry differently than silence. They linger. They travel along walls and staircases. They settle into memory, shaping behavior in ways never acknowledged aloud. A woman may not know exactly what happened to her cousin, her aunt, her acquaintance, but she knows enough to understand that disappearance is possible. Possible, but not discussable. This paradox creates a strange calm. Danger is acknowledged privately but denied publicly. It exists in the margins of awareness, never close enough to provoke action, never distant enough to be fully dismissed. It becomes part of the background, a low murmur beneath confidence. The families who spoke in whispers believed they were protecting themselves. In truth, they were protecting the systems that required their silence to continue unchanged. By lowering their voices, they ensured that loss would never grow loud enough to demand reform. The sea, indifferent, continues to take when conditions align. Ships continue to depart. And in homes far from the water, families continue to whisper, keeping grief contained, preserving appearances, and unknowingly passing forward the quiet acceptance that allows the next voyage to feel just as safe as the last. When explanation becomes necessary, it is offered carefully, not too detailed, not too inquisitive. The cause must be distant enough to avoid discomfort, large enough to absorb responsibility, and impersonal enough to resist correction. The sea fulfills these requirements perfectly. It is vast. It is ancient. It cannot be questioned. So when ships fail, the sea is named. Families are told of unpredictable conditions. Reports mention natural forces. Weather is cited. Currents implied. Fate invoked with quiet authority. The implication is clear. Nothing human could have prevented what occurred. The world remains blameless. Only nature is at fault. This framing is comforting. It absolves institutions without argument. If the sea is responsible, then design need not be scrutinized. Decisions need not be re-examined. Confidence in progress remains intact. The loss becomes tragic but inevitable, something to be mourned, not analyzed. Women accept this explanation readily. They have been taught to view nature as something separate from human systems, unruly, uncontrollable, exempt from moral accounting. To blame the sea is to surrender to a force beyond reason, and surrender feels easier than suspicion. Suspicion invites instability. To suspect design is to question authority. To question authority is to disrupt trust. And trust, especially for women whose lives depend on orderly systems, is a precious resource not easily relinquished. The sea, then, becomes a convenient boundary. It marks the limit of inquiry. Beyond it, no responsibility can be assigned. The conversation ends there, tidy and untroubling. Families can grieve without demanding change. Companies can continue without admitting fault. Society can move forward without hesitation. The women who board ships afterward inherit this logic. They are told explicitly or implicitly that danger belongs to the environment, not to the vessel. That risk arises from storms, ice, darkness, never from confidence, speed, or assumption. The ship itself remains beyond suspicion. This belief shapes behavior profoundly. A woman who hears of a loss at sea does not imagine structural failure. She imagines waves, wind, cold. She imagines forces that no amount of preparation could overcome. Her trust in modern design remains untouched. Even when the weather is calm, the sea is still blamed. Its capacity for danger is treated as permanent and unpredictable, absolving human choice of consequence. The irony is subtle. The more the sea is framed as uncontrollable, the less human systems are expected to adapt responsibly. The sea becomes the scapegoat for certainty's failures. This scapegoating carries moral weight. It suggests that those lost were simply unlucky rather than misled, that their trust was reasonable, that nothing in the system requires change. Their disappearance is folded into a narrative of inevitability rather than error. Women sense this instinctively. They understand that blame directed outward preserves dignity inward. It protects families from shame, institutions from scrutiny, and belief from fracture. The sea accepts blame without protest. It does not defend itself. It does not demand reform. So the story holds. The ocean is dangerous, yes, but only in ways already acknowledged. Modern ships, by contrast, remain symbols of safety. Their failures are reframed as encounters with an adversary too powerful to overcome, rather than as moments when confidence exceeded preparation. This distinction matters. It allows progress to continue unchallenged. It reassures future passengers that nothing essential has gone wrong. It preserves the illusion that risk has been externalized, that danger lies outside human control. The women step aboard believing this. They do not imagine that systems might create vulnerability. They do not suspect that silence, speed, or certainty could contribute to loss. They trust that if danger exists, it comes from the sea alone. And so the ship continues forward, carrying with it a story carefully told and carefully believed, one in which blame has been neatly assigned to an ancient, voiceless force, leaving human confidence untouched and entirely unexamined. The sea, indifferent as ever, accepts the blame. It has no reason not to. Trust does not expire when proof erodes. It lingers, sustained by habit, by inheritance, by the quiet agreement that doubt is more dangerous than faith. Long after warning signs accumulate, long after absence suggests pattern rather than coincidence, trust continues its work, smoothing over contradictions that might otherwise demand attention. The women who board ships in these years do so with trust already installed. It has been shaped since childhood, reinforced through schooling, etiquette, and example. They have learned that well-designed systems are meant to be relied upon. That authority, once established, deserves patience. That confidence should not be withdrawn lightly or publicly. Evidence arrives slowly. It arrives in fragments, scattered across households and ports, never gathered into a single, undeniable shape. One woman does not return, then another. Then a name appears briefly in print before disappearing again. Each instance is treated as isolated, each loss explained away before it can settle into meaning. Trust absorbs these fragments easily. It reframes them as unfortunate exceptions, statistical noise within a system otherwise sound. To see them as connected would require a different posture entirely, one that acknowledges pattern, responsibility, and fallibility. Such acknowledgement would destabilize more than belief in ships. It would threaten belief in progress itself. So trust remains. It persists even as evidence accumulates quietly beneath it. The absence of women becomes familiar without becoming alarming. It is known without being confronted. People adjust emotionally without adjusting structurally. This endurance of trust is not ignorance. It is maintenance. Trust is actively preserved through language, through omission, through the careful handling of information. Reports are softened, conversations redirected, questions discouraged gently, with reminders of propriety and perspective. The women internalize these signals. They understand that to question too much is to risk appearing hysterical, ungrateful, or disruptive. They have been taught that composure is virtue, and that trust, especially in modern systems, is part of that composure. So they board ships believing what they are meant to believe. That safety is established, that lessons have been learned, that what happened before will not happen again, not because it was fully understood, but because enough time has passed to make confidence feel reasonable once more. Time is a powerful ally of trust. As memories fade, certainty grows. The lack of immediate consequence becomes reassurance. Each successful crossing quiets doubt further, allowing trust to reassert itself without challenge. Evidence, meanwhile, remains scattered. It is never assembled into indictment. It is never given the weight required to alter behavior. It exists only as background acknowledged privately, dismissed publicly. Trust thrives in this environment. It does not require proof to survive, only continuity. As long as ships continue to depart and arrive, trust renews itself automatically. It becomes self-sustaining, outliving the evidence that should have weakened it. The women who step aboard are not reckless. They are obedient to a narrative that has not yet been broken. They trust because trust has been modeled, rewarded, and normalized. They trust because doing otherwise would place them outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior. And so trust carries on quietly, persistently, long after it should have been revised. It moves with the ship, embedded in every assumption, every reassurance, every silence that stands in for explanation. It survives absence, absorbs loss, and resists inquiry, until the moment arrives when evidence can no longer be ignored, until trust is forced to confront something too large, too public, too undeniable to be contained. But for now, trust remains intact, outliving the proof against it, guiding women onto decks with steady steps, and allowing systems built on confidence to continue forward without interruption. The sea waits. It always does. There is always a moment when certainty hesitates. It is brief, often unnoticed, and easily dismissed. A sensation without a name, a pause that does not yet qualify as alarm. The world continues to function, but something in its rhythm feels slightly altered, as though the familiar has shifted just enough to be felt, but not enough to be believed. This moment arrives quietly aboard the ship. Women sense it individually, never collectively. A glance held a fraction too long. a sound that does not resolve into explanation, a steward's expression that tightens and then smooths again. Nothing overt, nothing undeniable. Recognition has not yet occurred. What exists instead is suspicion without structure, awareness without permission. The mind reaches for precedent and finds reassurance waiting, ready to intervene. This has happened before. Nothing came of it. It is improper to worry without cause. So, the feeling is set aside. The ship offers no confirmation. No announcement arrives. The engines continue their cadence. Doors open and close. Life proceeds along its expected channels. Without reinforcement, doubt dissolves back into background noise. This is the system at work. It trains passengers not to trust their first impressions when those impressions conflict with the narrative of safety. Sensation must be verified externally before it can be honored internally. Until then, it is treated as personal weakness rather than meaningful information. Women have learned this lesson well. They know the cost of reacting prematurely. Embarrassment, correction, quiet disapproval. Better to wait, better to be certain, better to let authority speak first. The moment before recognition is where this discipline proves most effective. It catches awareness before it can organize. It interrupts instinct with etiquette. It replaces immediacy with restraint. And because it is so brief, it is easily forgotten, absorbed into routine without consequence. The ship continues forward. Recognition, when it comes, will require accumulation, multiple signals aligning into something undeniable. One irregularity is nothing, two a coincidence, three might warrant attention. But the system is designed to prevent accumulation from being noticed too quickly. Information arrives in fragments. A closed door here, a redirected path there, a steward instructed not to linger. These changes are small enough to be explained away individually. Together, they might suggest urgency, but no one is positioned to assemble them. Women experience the fragments as inconvenience, not warning. They adjust without protest. They trust that deviation is temporary, purposeful, already accounted for. The ship has not asked them to recognize anything, so they do not. This delay is not accidental. It preserves order, it prevents panic, it maintains hierarchy. Recognition, after all, carries responsibility. Once a situation is acknowledged as serious, behavior must change. Questions must be asked. Authority must justify itself. The moment before recognition is the last space where nothing is required. It is a fragile interval, balanced between awareness and denial. Once crossed, it cannot be returned to. So the system lingers there as long as possible, stretching the pause into minutes, sometimes hours. The women remain suspended within it. They feel unease without context. They sense that something has shifted, but not enough to act upon. Their bodies register what their minds have not yet been permitted to accept. Recognition waits. It waits for evidence to become undeniable, for silence to break, for routine to fail visibly. Until then, the ship continues its performance, offering continuity as reassurance. This is the final comfort. The calm before clarity, the pause before truth acquires language. The moment when belief still holds, even as reality presses closer. When recognition finally arrives, it will do so suddenly, collapsing distance in an instant. But for now, the women remain in that narrow space just before it, where certainty hesitates, trust lingers, and the world has not yet demanded that they see what is already quietly beginning to reveal itself. Reassurance does not fail because it is false. It fails because of timing. When it finally arrives, it does so with careful phrasing and measured tone, shaped by habit rather than urgency. It carries the familiar cadence of authority, calm, precise, confident. Its purpose is not to inform, but to settle, and for a moment it succeeds. Women listen closely. They are relieved to hear a voice that sounds composed. Relief spreads faster than fear ever could. The presence of reassurance suggests that control remains intact, that whatever has unsettled the rhythm of the ship has already been understood and addressed. Words, after all, imply oversight. But reassurance arrives after something else has already shifted. It follows unease rather than preceding it. It responds to confusion instead of preventing it. By the time it is spoken, time has already moved on, without instruction. Decisions that should have been made earlier have been delayed in deference to calm. The reassurance is vague. It avoids specifics. It references precaution rather than danger. It assures without explaining. This is intentional. Specifics provoke questions. Questions disrupt order. The reassurance is designed to close inquiry, not open it. Women accept this gladly. They have been waiting for permission to stop wondering. The reassurance provides it. It offers language that replaces the unsettling silence, giving shape to uncertainty without demanding action. There is no cause for alarm. Everything is being managed. These phrases feel complete, but they do not instruct. They do not tell women what to do next. They do not clarify what has changed. They do not acknowledge the earlier moments of unease. Instead, they overwrite them, encouraging listeners to reinterpret what they felt as unnecessary concern. This reinterpretation is powerful. It teaches women to doubt their own perceptions. If reassurance exists, then fear must have been misplaced. If authority remains calm, then reality must still be under control. The reassurance becomes proof not of safety, but of legitimacy. Yet time does not pause for reassurance. While words circulate politely through the decks, conditions continue to evolve. Delays compound. Options narrow. The window for simple correction begins to close, unnoticed by those still absorbing calm. Reassurance, offered late, becomes a form of distraction. It occupies attention precisely when awareness should sharpen. It smooths over urgency at the moment. Urgency demands clarity. It preserves order while undermining readiness. Women sense the contradiction faintly. Something in the reassurance feels thin, not wrong, but incomplete. It answers a question they are no longer asking. Their bodies have moved ahead of their minds, registering urgency that language has failed to match. Still, etiquette prevails. To challenge reassurance would be improper. To ask follow-up questions would suggest distrust. And distrust in moments like this feels dangerous not because it invites harm, but because it invites chaos. So reassurance settles like ether. It dulls the edge of awareness just enough to keep behavior unchanged. It maintains stillness. It buys time not for safety, but for inevitability. By the time the reassurance proves insufficient, it is too late for it to matter. Its failure will not be obvious immediately. It will not collapse dramatically. Instead, it will fade quietly, replaced by something unmistakable, by evidence that no phrasing can soften, no tone can calm. The tragedy of reassurance is not that it lies. It is that it arrives at the wrong moment, offering calm when clarity is needed, comfort when instruction is required, and certainty when uncertainty should finally be acknowledged. For the women aboard, reassurance feels like relief. Only later will it be understood as the last thing that stood between awareness and action, and the moment when trust, still intact, allowed time to slip away beyond recovery. Movement begins not with urgency, but with hesitation. A chair scrapes softly against the floor. A woman rises, then pauses, unsure whether standing is appropriate. Others follow, mirroring the action without understanding its purpose. The stillness that once felt protective now feels brittle, as though it might shatter if pressed too firmly. No clear instruction has been given, and yet something has shifted. The reassurance has expired. Its effect lingers only faintly, like a scent that no longer masks what lies beneath. Women look around not for comfort now, but for direction, and find none immediately offered. So movement begins cautiously, not running, not shouting, just a quiet rearranging of bodies. People gather belongings they are not sure they will need. Gloves are put on, removed, put on again. Coats are adjusted with care that borders on ritual. Familiar habits surface instinctively, even when they no longer serve the moment. This is how order tries to reassert itself. Women move as they have been trained to move deliberately, politely, without drawing attention. They wait for space to clear. They step aside for others. They apologize reflexively, even now. Etiquette does not dissolve simply because circumstances have changed. The ship's design reinforces this restraint. Corridors narrow movement into lines. Doors regulate flow. Stairways impose sequence. Nothing encourages speed. Nothing invites improvisation. The architecture assumes calm cooperation, not rapid response. So movement slows itself. Each pause feels reasonable. Each hesitation feels justified. Without explicit urgency, women must decide for themselves how much haste is appropriate, and that decision is burdened by years of conditioning. To rush would appear improper. To push past others would feel unthinkable. To demand answers aloud would violate the unspoken agreement that has governed the crossing from the beginning. Even now, order is preserved through behavior, not instruction. This preservation has a cost. As women move, they notice that others are doing the same, drawn by the same unspoken cue. Corridors grow crowded, staircases fill. The absence of clear direction turns movement into convergence, gathering people toward the same spaces without coordination. Questions begin to surface, not shouted but murmured. Do you know where we're meant to go? Have you heard anything? The answers are uncertain, often contradictory. Information, when shared, arrives second-hand, distorted by distance and assumption. Still, movement continues. It feels necessary now, even if its purpose remains unclear. Standing still has become unbearable. The body seeks action before the mind fully understands why. This shift from stillness to motion is profound. It marks the end of trust as passive acceptance. Something has finally overridden the instinct to wait. The women may not yet recognize danger, but they recognize change, and that recognition propels them forward. Yet movement alone is not enough. Without guidance, it becomes inefficient. Without clarity, it becomes crowded. The systems designed to manage calm cooperation strain under the weight of uncoordinated action. What once facilitated order now restricts it. The women sense this too. They feel the narrowing of options, the compression of space, the pressure of time without being able to name it. The ship no longer feels expansive. It feels constrained, as though it has grown smaller around them. Movement continues, hesitant but persistent. Each step carries them further from the stillness that once defined safety, and closer to a reality that no longer accommodates politeness as its primary rule. The transition is subtle, but irreversible. They are moving now, not because they have been told to, not because they understand what is happening, but because waiting no longer feels possible. This is the moment when behavior changes before belief does, when the body accepts what the mind is still resisting. Movement has begun, and once begun, it will not stop. Politely. Order does not vanish all at once. It lingers, stubborn and brittle, clinging to habits that no longer fit the moment. Even as the situation shifts beyond recognition, the impulse to behave correctly persists. People continue to queue. They wait for turns that may never come. They search for authority figures not to challenge them, but to receive permission to act. The women cling to this instinct. They adjust their posture, even as the floor beneath them feels subtly unfamiliar. They keep voices low, not because silence is required, but because loudness still feels inappropriate. Panic, after all, is something other people do, people without training, without refinement. This belief is difficult to abandon. For years, order has protected them. It has governed entrances and exits, conversations and conflicts. It has ensured that things unfold predictably. Now, as predictability dissolves, order remains by habit alone, an inherited response to uncertainty. The ship appears to cooperate with this illusion. Lights remain lit, corridors still exist, doors still open and close. Nothing visually announces collapse. The familiar remains visible, and visibility feels like stability. As long as the structure holds, the assumption persists that behavior should remain structured as well. This assumption delays everything. Women hesitate at thresholds, waiting for instruction that does not arrive. They defer to imagined rules rather than present reality. Even when movement accelerates around them, they pause, unsure whether acceleration is allowed. Allowed, the word still governs thought. Who has permission to move first? Who must wait? Who decides? These questions are reflexive, rising automatically from a lifetime spent navigating hierarchy. Without answers, action feels transgressive. So order is preserved artificially. Lines form where they should not. Space is respected when it should be claimed. The politeness that once made society function now slows response to a moment that demands urgency rather than decorum. Some women begin to sense the mismatch. They notice that the old rules no longer produce safety, that waiting does not lead to clarity, that order, once reassuring, now feels like a constraint. But unlearning it takes time that is no longer abundant. The illusion of order persists longest among those who trust it most. Those who have benefited from structure find it hardest to abandon. They believe, even now, that adherence will be rewarded, that compliance will result in protection. The idea that survival might require disorder feels deeply wrong. Disorder implies failure, and failure has been carefully avoided in every other aspect of their lives. The thought that propriety might be irrelevant now is almost unthinkable. The ship continues to change around them. Subtle angles become noticeable. Sounds carry differently. The environment no longer behaves exactly as expected, yet the visible framework remains intact enough to sustain belief. Order, though strained, still appears possible. This appearance is deceptive. Structure without function is merely shape. Rules without relevance become obstacles. The women sense this intuitively, but intuition must fight years of conditioning before it can act. Some begin to break away. They move faster. They speak more directly. They push past hesitation, not rudely, but decisively. These actions feel shocking, almost improper, yet they also feel necessary. The old order no longer answers the moment. Others watch, uncertain. Is this the correct response? Or is it panic masquerading as decisiveness? Without guidance, every action becomes a gamble, either too much or too little. The illusion of order fractures unevenly. It holds some in place while releasing others. It divides behavior along invisible lines of confidence, conditioning, and readiness to abandon expectation. There is no unified response, only overlapping attempts to interpret what the moment requires. This fragmentation marks the true end of order. Not its dramatic collapse, but its quiet irrelevance. The rules still exist, but no longer apply. The structure remains, but no longer protects. What once guided behavior now confuses it. The women stand at the threshold of this realization, some already beyond it, others still clinging to formality as if it might yet save them. Order has not disappeared. It has simply stopped working. And in the space where it once provided certainty, something far less forgiving begins to take its place, demanding action without instruction, decisiveness without approval, and survival without ceremony. In the end, the sea does not rush. It never has. It waits with a patience that does not register as threat until it is far too late to matter. While human voices rise and fall, while systems falter and certainty collapses, the water remains consistent, cold, vast, unmoved by the urgency unfolding above it. The women sense this last, not as terror but as clarity. There comes a moment when explanation ceases to be relevant, when reassurance has no language left to offer, and when order once so carefully preserved falls away entirely. What remains is not panic but recognition, a quiet, devastating understanding that nothing else is coming. No final instruction, no corrective announcement, no unseen authority stepping forward to restore balance. The sea, which had been treated as passive for so long, asserts itself without drama. It does not roar or threaten. It simply receives what has been brought to it: steel, wood, confidence, lives without distinction. Women stand at the edge of this realization differently. Some hold on to familiar gestures to the very end, adjusting clothing, steadying posture, clinging to the belief that dignity still matters. Others abandon form entirely, driven by instinct, finally unrestrained by etiquette. There is no single response, no uniform behavior. Only individual reckonings shaped by a lifetime of trust, now rendered irrelevant. The sea does not judge these differences. It does not reward composure or punish hesitation. It does not distinguish between those who believed longest and those who recognized sooner. It accepts everything evenly, without narrative, without lesson. This is what makes it unbearable. The women had trusted that meaning would accompany consequence, that if something went wrong, it would do so in a way that made sense. Instead, the end arrives without coherence. It is not earned or deserved. It is simply the conclusion of momentum left unchecked. What the sea takes is not only life. It takes certainty. It takes the belief that systems protect those who comply with them. It takes the quiet assurance that progress moves forward without cost. It strips away the illusion that safety can be inherited, that trust alone is sufficient preparation. And it takes these things without acknowledgement. There is no reckoning beneath the surface, no memory, no preservation of story. The sea does not keep accounts. It does not mark significance. What disappears into it becomes indistinguishable from everything that vanished before. On land, the world will continue. Families will speak in lowered voices. Explanations will be offered carefully. Blame will be placed where it cannot argue back. Confidence will return, slowly, reshaped, but not dismantled. Ships will sail again. But something irreversible has occurred. The moment when trust outlived evidence has reached its limit. The quiet faith that carried women onto decks with steady steps has met a reality indifferent to belief. The sea has accepted what was given to it, not out of cruelty, but out of constancy. This is the final truth the crossing reveals. That the greatest danger was never the water itself, but the certainty that believed it had already been mastered. That risk did not arrive suddenly, but was built patiently, piece by piece, through silence, reassurance, and unexamined confidence. The sea did not change. Only the illusion surrounding it did. And when that illusion finally gave way, it left behind no lesson written clearly enough to prevent repetition, only absence, quiet, and the knowledge that before the Titanic, women had already learned this truth at the cost of everything. The sea took what it was offered. It always does.